Good morning and welcome to the fourth meeting in 2026 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, and I remind all members and witnesses to ensure their devices are on silent. Fulton McGregor and Mark Griffin are joining us online this morning. And the first item on our agenda is to take decisions on taking business in private, and firstly we need to decide whether to take items 4, 5 and 6 in private. Are members agreed? Thank you. We also need to decide whether our consideration of a draft report on the climate change plan should be taken in private in a future meeting. Are we agreed? We're agreed. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence on the Visitor Levy Amendment Scotland Bill, and we're joined today by two panels of witnesses. In the first panel, we're going to be hearing views on the bill from representatives of local government, and we're joined in the room by Gareth Dixon, who's from COSLA, and Ellen Williamson, who is from the City of Edinburgh Council. Welcome. We are also joined online by Jamie Coventry from Aberdeen City Council, Christy Hartley from Orkney Island Council, Malcolm MacLeod, who's from the Highland Council, and Fergus Murray, who's from Argyll and Bute Council. And I welcome you all to the meeting and thank you for your attendance, particularly in light of the short notice and the tight timescales of this bill. So there's no need for you to turn on your microphones, both for those in the room and online. We'll do that for you. And I'm now going to start by asking a few questions. We've got a number of areas we want to cover. So I'm going to cover the area of why is this legislation needed now? And I'll try to mix it up so we're not always going to the people in the room first off. But I think in this instance, I might go to people in the room first off. So Gareth, I'm going to direct this question to you in the initial so you know it's coming. I'd be interested to hear what engagement you had with the Scottish Government on this bill so far. What did local authorities ask for, and what, if anything, changed as a result of the engagement?
So thank you, Convener, for those three questions. I'll do my best to answer them in that order. COSLA have been engaging with the Scottish Government, obviously, on a fairly kind of regular basis in terms of the development of the bill, and I imagine you're asking about the amendment bill rather than the original bill. Okay, understood.
The sake of this whole meeting is about the amendment. Yeah,
that's fine. So there has been engagement between officers, just sort of sharing out the original outline. We were first made aware of this around about sort of September time last year, and that engagement was really just the sort of notification, which I think became fairly public, related to the housing bill when that was going through stage 3. I think it's worth sort of highlighting that the reaction across local government has been sort of fairly mixed. Some have obviously been calling for a fixed amount levy, and under the basis of that being that having a flexibility and having a sort of that local discretion and allows you to design a scheme that is compatible and sort of the best fit for that area. However, it's also worth noting that at that time, many local authorities were at critical phases of their consideration. Some were at the formal consultation phase, and others had already done considerable amount of work, and that obviously created a bit of a disruption to their considerations. There were a few that proceeded with their consideration and approved their schemes sort of in that interim period, but there were others that it felt as if they required a little bit more certainty, and that created some decision-making that they had to look to delay it. And of course, there are others that had agreed the scheme a long time ago, and that created additional kind of pressures and for work for officers to deal with.
Okay. Great, thanks very much. I'm going to just tuck my second question in. I've got a specific question for Argyll and Bute and Highland, and also for Orkney Island Council, but I'm going to tuck another question in. So from your perspective, what problem was urgent enough, hearing what you said, that some local authorities were in critical phases? From your perspective, what problem was urgent enough that it needed primary legislation now, and what would happen on the ground if this bill slipped into the next session?
With dividing the bill up into those two parts, I mean, there's the first part that's looking at the introduction or that additional flexibility of a fixed amount levy, and that gives local authorities more flexibility to design something that suits their local area. So that aids them. There were other ones that simplify the implementation of the levy and as its current standing. I mean, some of those were correcting terminology that I think was already understood, but I think on the back of further legal consideration, it needed tightening up. And then I think on the first sale price issue specifically, that is a ready-made solution that's a potential. But of course, there's nuances within that, and I think mindful of sort of unintended consequences with that as well. But so things that were there to improve the implementation of the levy, I think, is wrapped up within this bill as well.
And what would happen if it slipped into the next session after the election, basically?
I think there's maybe some legal, obviously the chargeable transaction. I think that needed primary legislation to fix, is my understanding. But I think there's still, I mean, we'll maybe hear this from other colleagues as well. There's still opportunities to kind of work within the existing legislation to find solutions. So some of it is needed, and some of it's more optional, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm going to just ask my two questions for Highland and Orkney Island Council, and then I'm going to open the room for others to kind of come back on the two questions I just asked Gareth. So Argyll, this is addressed to Murray and Malcolm. I'd be interested to understand the impacts for you, because I believe that you're maybe two of the local authorities that were in critical phases having paused your visitor levy schemes. I know actually that the Highland one was about to go to a full council meeting and then got paused. So could I hear firstly from Fergus and then Highland Council, Malcolm?
Yeah, thank you. Argyll Bute, in terms of the visitor levy, is at a critical stage. We have undertaken the 12-week consultation across Argyll and Bute. There was a significant amount of people that fed back into that consultation, and of course the consultation was based on the original bill. We took a lot of feedback back in terms of the practicality of the delivery, concerns over the use of a percentage rate, and we fed that back to our councillors, who made the decision to pause the levy. And they took into account as well initial feedback from the Scottish Government that they were looking at the issue that was highlighted through previous public consultations done by councils. And we did write to the Scottish Government with some concerns over utilising the percentage rate, and also feedback from businesses in terms of simplicity of collection when the levy was to be collected, etc., etc. So there's a number of different issues that was raised through that consultation over the 12 weeks. And we made a major study of that response as part of through ECOS. And we felt that through the information that we gathered through the consultation, through the feedback from the analysis, through the potential for some amendments coming through legislation, though there was no guarantee on that, the council decided to pause the legislation to see if some of the concerns that we heard from businesses, residents and others could be taken into account by the government through an amended legislation. We're still at that position in terms of a pause. There will be a further meeting of the council this week, but I think the recommendation is still to pause, depending on what happens through the bill, what amendments might come through the bill before we come back to council again with a further recommendation. And there's no decision taken on that yet. We're just waiting on what the amended legislation offers the council in terms of flexibility.
Okay.
That's really where we are.
All right, thanks very much for that picture, Fergus. So just to clarify, you've taken that consultation over 12 weeks, you've got very useful information, you've got some concerns, and this pause actually, you're not necessarily going to lose all that consultation work, but you could add to it or amend it based on those views and based on this amendment legislation.
Well, definitely. We don't
Yeah.
want to lose work. That's
Okay.
huge amount.
Great,
Huge amount.
good. Glad to hear it's not all been undone. If I can hear from Highland Council, that would be great. Malcolm, come on in. How's it
Thanks.
going
Good
there?
morning.
Morning.
So again, with us, we took a report to December Council seeking agreement to pause our implementation of the levy until the legislation was brought through its process, and that was on the back of, again, a statutory consultation we carried out in the first half of last year. We ended up with just over 4,000 responses. And not surprisingly, perhaps, to those who are aware of the issues, the top result was that the feedback we got was on the perceived advantages of a per night fee rather than a percentage-based levy. And we'd gone on a 5% levy as part of our consultation. And I think the key for us, our convener wrote a number of times representing the views that were coming from both the consultation and the group we set up, the Vista Levy group we set up with industry to reflect that concern that actually a flat rate was seen as a more appropriate way forward. So again, like Argyll and Bute, the one thing that came out of the consultation generally, both in terms of meetings and in terms of people writing in, was that people were not against the principle of a levy, but they were certainly not happy with the percentage basis of it. I think that kind of sums it up very simply, if you like. And we have agreed that should the legislation be amended, it's not about throwing out the original consultation, but we will do a full statutory consultation again, just because we've got to go. We feel that there's such a change. We'll go through our 12-week consultation again, but we really feel that having that certainty over the ability to have the choice of what route we go down will certainly, I hope, get a lot more buy-in. There are still some other issues, but they're not for today, I guess.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So now I'm just going to come back and see if Ellen or... oh, no, I've got another question, so sorry. Orkney Island Council, Christy, could you maybe give us a bit of a view of the point that all island local authorities have decided against introducing a visitor levy at this moment in time? Could you give us a view, speaking on behalf of them, as to maybe why Orkney Island Council has decided to do that?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Back in March and April of last year, Western Islands Council, together with Orkney Islands Council, Shetland Islands Council, commissioned external consultants to undertake feasibility investigations for each island authority. Those investigations included a program of engagement with stakeholders, as well as a cost-benefit analysis. And what we found across the three, well, I'll speak for Orkney. What we found for Orkney is that while there's support in principle for a levy that funds long-term investment in infrastructure, environmental conservation, etc., in tourism, however, the thresholds for acceptance amongst stakeholders is that the theme of fairness rang true through every consultation. There's an expectation that any visitor levy would apply more broadly and include high impact segments, especially cruise, where here in Orkney, cruise accounts for, on average, half of all of our visitors. And so that is a clear red line for acceptance. As well, there's an expectation that local residents would be exempt. Now, from the cost-benefit analysis, we found that from our conservative estimates, we were unable to accurately really forecast the level of exemptions that would that would apply. However, given the visitor numbers, and again, saying that it applies, a levy on overnight accommodation would apply to less than half visitors, we would simply not have sufficient revenue to make it viable. So applying to, if there was a point of entry levy, so the reason that we're discussing this is at the same time as the consultation was happening, the Scottish Government launched its cruise ship levy consultation, and stakeholders, there was a question number 18 in that consultation that asked about the potential for a point of entry levy for island authorities. And so stakeholders widely saw that as a much fairer option because it did meet the threshold of fairness applying to more broadly, and it would include motorhomes, which is an increasing concern here, as well as cruise. And given that we already have mechanisms in place from our transport operators for flights and ferries to exempt local residents, that would be most welcome. And so again, that's widely seen as the most
All right, great.
best.
Thanks very much for that clarity. Yes, and that's a good point about the cruise ships. I'm going to, I know others haven't had a chance to speak, but just in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next theme, which is changes to the basis on which a visitor levy can be changed. And I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher with a number of questions. And Megan, I hope you can bring in the people who haven't spoken yet.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to all panellists this morning. I'm interested in how multiple schemes could operate within a local authority area. Certainly, it appears to me that if the visitor levy is to go ahead and be implemented in local authority areas, it's got to be a simple system. It's got to be one that's easy to process, and it's got to be a system where it's not going to be overburdensome on the operators. That's all the people who are within the sector itself. So I'm looking to find answers in relation to how the operational risks of a multiple scheme may operate. So that's in the context of dynamic pricing, variable length of stay and multiple booking platforms, and what contingency modelling, if any, local authority has put in that contingency modelling has been done specifically in relation to compliance loss and collection error. I'm not entirely sure who might want to pick up, Convener, but obviously I'm interested to maybe hear from those who haven't been able to come in yet.
Yeah. So if that question is relevant to your situation, please indicate and we'll bring you in. Ellen.
So I think as the local authority that is probably farthest ahead in implementation, I can certainly speak for that. There has been issues over the last years in trying to, and there's been unforeseen consequences of the original legislation. We have done our very best to try and work through them, both with stakeholders, with the Scottish Government and with accommodation providers. We have prepared contingencies in the sense that we've taken a quite strict approach with our forecasting models, and we have made financial assumptions around not fully committing the full levy upfront until we've seen the initial collection results. We also try and understand, we've set aside money in the scheme to ensure that we have a contingency pot, and that would be for further down the road in case the basis for a levy would change or any other unforeseen circumstances, if there was another pandemic, for example. But I think for us, the most important thing has been to try and be prudent in our financial projections. So we've, wherever possible, have tried to go for the lowest possible results. So whenever there is a range, we assume the lower end of that range as opposed to the higher end of that range. But as with all financial projections, it will obviously be subject to the reality once the collections start. I'm sorry, that was probably the main focus around contingency. Could you remind me what the...
So it's in relation to contingency and future-proofing in relation to potential compliance loss and also collection error. So I'm specifically talking about You know, and I can use Glasgow City Council just as an example, because their modelling has shown a 5% levy generating 16.9 million, approximately £4.86 per night, while the proposed tiered banded model could generate £23.6 million, but it comes with that significantly higher complexity around the modelling itself. So it's about the compliance and the loss that's generated in terms of what actually suits local authorities alongside the sector in order to try and simplify the model, but also make it the best possible model.
So I suppose from our perspective, what we have said from the start is that every local authority needs to decide what works for them and whether a visitor levy is right for them in the first place, depending on their visitor economy, depending on their tourism sector as a whole. For Edinburgh, we do firmly believe that a visitor levy is the right approach. Edinburgh has a very wide spread in terms of accommodation types that are offered. So we have high-end luxury accommodation as well as budget accommodation. You can share a dorm bed and anything in between. Like in Orkney, when we consulted with our residents and with visitors, fairness was often quoted by everyone, and there was a strong sense that having people pay the same if they can afford to pay £2,500 for a night in a suite, it would seem unfair that they would pay the same as someone who's paying, say, £25 for a shared dorm bed. And therefore, percentage is something that works for Edinburgh. And although there have been issues with the implementation, it still reflects the dynamic pricing that we also see. So although Edinburgh is an all-year-round visitor city, we do see an uptake in certain months of the year. I'm sure no one will be surprised to hear that August is one of the most popular months in Edinburgh. But we also have strong events that will attract extra visitors. We've had global artists performing, which has impacted hotel prices, etc. So a percentage takes into account all of those things like dynamic pricing, seasonality, location in the city as well. So anyone who's staying outside the city will automatically pay less visitor levy, as their hotel room will also likely be much less than it would be if they're staying in the city centre. So all of that is being taken into consideration and is one of the reasons why a percentage does work for Edinburgh. Whereas I can imagine that a local authority that has a much more homogenic offering and for example, has predominantly only short-term let accommodation, a fixed fee may work much better for them.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, convener, so I'll move on to my next question. There's a debate right now in relation to whether the fixed rate model to accommodation providers and customers should either be the fixed rate per unit as opposed to rate per person. And I'd be interested to hear briefly from maybe one or two local authorities why per unit is not favourable and why there seems to be more emphasis on per person.
Would you like to come in on that? I think somebody online, yeah, if you can indicate. Okay, nobody online. Okay, oh, okay. Ellen, do you want to come back in?
Absolutely. So we have looked at this, and Gareth can perhaps speak even more for kind of global research. Our understanding is that per person is much more common globally. A per person rate would allow for better intelligence for local authorities as well in terms of understanding exactly how many people are are actually visiting the city. And particularly, and it would make it easier if you were to do exemptions, because exemptions tend to be based on the person as opposed to the room. So a per person fee may be much easier to administer from a local authority perspective. I imagine it will be much harder to administer from an accommodation provider perspective, as there isn't currently any obligation on them to know exactly how many people are in their unit at any given time. That's my understanding, though, and I do apologise if that's not the correct understanding.
I'm going to go online to Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. And given that no one else wanted to mention or reply online, I think from my point of view and from our point of view, we're not having a huge debate on this. I think both approaches will work for us if we decide to take this way forward. But what I would say is that keeping flexibility at this point is important as we develop the scheme, so that we can go through the things that were just mentioned in the previous answer about what works best. So having that flexibility right now is a good thing, so that we can engage with industry as we move forward. And I think that we need to reflect on, the reason that this is being brought forward is perhaps because things were too restricted to begin with. And certainly from my point of view and Highland Council's point of view, keeping things as open as possible at this point will allow us much more room to discuss and change in the context of the consultation we carry out in the future.
You can have a really brief supplementary for Malcolm. I appreciate the remarks that you've made in relation to flexibility for local authorities, but can you understand how difficult that could be for an accommodation provider working across more than one local authority area? For example, if one local authority area decides to go per unit, then another local authority area goes per person. You can surely understand how a simplified system will no longer become simplified. It will become complex for accommodation providers to operate, and therefore some might decide that they're going to leave the sector entirely because it's just not workable for them.
I would accept where there are businesses that are across different local authorities who tend to be the largest and therefore much more able to build these things into their business models. I think, so I do accept it's a complexity, but the implementation of the levy as a whole, is going to be a challenge. But certainly, again, I go back to the feedback we got from our consultation. The business from small to very large sectors were not against the principle. But, again, a lot of devil will be in the detail, and we will look to engage on things like this as we move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I know that others wanted to come in on that, but I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin, just in the interest of time. I'm going to be saying that a lot this morning, and I apologise for that, and I'm really glad that you all have come to engage in this important bit of work. So I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin with his questions, and maybe that will, and other ones might bring in an opportunity to bring other points you wanted to make. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Good morning. I wonder if I can just quickly go around the witnesses this morning, just to ask for the views on whether the new legislation should set a maximum amount that should be charged per night.
Ellen, should we start with you here?
I personally would say that keeping the flexibility to a maximum should be, that was the intention of the legislation, and I think that should be left to local authorities to decide what the maximum should be.
Okay. So I'm going to rephrase Mark's question again in the interest of time. And so Ellen's has said that we should keep the flexibility, echoing what was previously said, so not putting in a maximum amount. Does anyone disagree with that? No. Okay. Mark, do you want to ask your next question?
Yep, thanks, Mayor. That was straightforward. We've touched briefly on some of the answers already about some local authorities potentially having to consult again if we introduce this flexibility. So, we've got Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Stirling and West Dunbartonshire councils already operating their schemes. And I just wonder from COSLA, and I think we've got Edinburgh here as well, I don't think we've got any others, just their view on how any potential change might impact them, what they feel the requirements might be to reconsult on any proposed alterations to their schemes.
So I've got Jamie indicating online and then Gareth.
Hi, yeah, we notified the Scottish Government in September last year to proceed with the percentage rate scheme, provisionally due to be implemented on the 1st of April 2027. If this bill becomes an act as it is, then we would have to reconsult for whatever the period is. But then they'd have to go through the council decision-making processes, and then subsequently notify the government again and then give an 18-month period like last time. So that process for the percentage rate scheme takes about 2 years. Now, if the consultation period was shortened or the implementation, the notification period was shortened, that could be less. But obviously, that has, that's a significant period of time, both to at the point of shifting from the percentage rate scheme, but also any subsequent changes. For instance, in the Act, there's a stipulation that you have to review the scheme every 3 years. So you might want to, in a fixed rate scheme, you might want to consider the rate every 3 years. But to do that within about a year of that 3-year cycle, you'd already be into the consultation period, and that would be, you'd be perpetually in that, and that would be. I suppose moving to that would be a consideration.
Yep. Can I just ask a quick supplementary, Jalen, just to ask how much that process has cost Aberdeen Council up to now, and whether you would expect that cost to be repeated again if you had to reconsult?
I mean, it was just done by the process of designing proposal was just by existing staff. I don't know how much that cost, but the actual consultation process was fairly minimal. Maybe a few thousand or something. I don't know exactly how much it was, to be honest, but we'd have to do it again.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just ask a supplementary on that, Jamie? You said if the consultation period was shorter, what would be a reasonable amount of time to shorten it to?
I don't know. I think it was 12 weeks before. I'm sure we could have done it in half of that.
Right. So you think you could have done it in 6?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But perhaps a bigger consideration is the implementation period afterwards. Because
right.
if you're thinking the consultation is 6 weeks, you've still got 18 months after that.
Right.
I'm thinking more about the whole cycle.
Okay.
That you'd be in.
So it would be better to reduce it because you're going to have to, that gets kicked off every time you want to reassess the situation.
Yeah, and that's going to be a consideration for anybody who's in a fixed rate scheme because of inflation or perhaps deflation within local authority circumstances. We might come on to that.
Okay, thanks. Gareth, you had indicated you want to come in on this one.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say that my colleague has summarised the points very well that I was going to raise, but and for the interest of time, but there's a few other things I could add to his point. On the costs of consultation, obviously there's a various number of options that a local authority could do. They could externally commission that consultation, for example, and in previous submissions it was estimated around £20,000. We also know that some local authorities have experienced like a high response rate, and that has required additional support, like an independent analysis. So I think those that have done that, we'd have a figure on that, although that figure could be, I mean, I'd be speculating how much it was, but it could be more than £20,000, for example. And on the 2 points that relate to the consultation period and whether that could be shortened, local authorities have a lot of experience in running consultations. And I think it's right that it's proportionate to the consideration of what you need to have a meaningful time and allow due consideration. So is shortening the consultation period the right thing, or is it looking at the whole system, as my colleague has outlined in terms of that implementation notice period?
Right, so the 18-month period is...
because that plays into it as well, and that kicks in after the local authorities have decided. So consultation, analysis of findings, and then that 18-month notice. So it's part of that collective.
Is your sense from talking to colleagues that 18-month period could be reasonably shortened?
I think it's something that could be looked at, yes.
Right. Okay, great, thanks. I know, Fergus, you had indicated you want to come in, but I'm going to move on and bring in Alexander Stewart, who's got questions around additional flexibility. It seems to be the top word of the day today, around the different fixed amount models. So maybe, Fergus, you might want to speak to that, and you can respond to other bits as well. Alexander.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, when we're looking at the additional flexibility, are there risks that flexibility for local authorities could mean confusion for businesses and consumers? And is anything required in the bill to ensure visitor levies aren't confusing than they need to be? And then you've indicated, and whatever.
Come on in, Ellen, and then we'll see who else comes up.
I think we're underestimating the consumer as well. The consumer is having travelled myself to countries where there have been different rates in different parts of the country. I've never felt confused by it. What I do think is that there is a risk of unintended consequences. I think we've talked about things like a fixed tiered rating system. What would those tiers be based on? Would it be pre or post VAT? Would it be, as now, the percentages to be based on accommodation only? So I think that there's more other unintended consequences that might come. I do think that flexibility is desirable for local authorities, and I think local authorities should be given the opportunity to decide. But I also think that at the moment we do have a legislation. It is working. There's been issues. We're working through them. And at the moment, we risk opening ourselves up to more confusion in terms of implementation, rather than focusing our efforts on solving the ones that are there in front of us. And then at the 3-year review, absolutely review and see, did that work, or do we need to make other changes? But I think that there are a lot of unintended consequences, and not necessarily for the consumer, I think for the local authorities and for the businesses in the areas.
Okay, thank you. Gareth, you want to comment?
It's just to emphasise that obviously communication is really important for any local authority that is doing a visitor levy, and I think it's important that attention is put on that, and that's why engagement is important to with businesses, as well as in terms of that comms work for educating potential visitors. And I have seen, especially with Edinburgh, a number of local hoteliers that are putting that information out on their own site, and I think that's to be encouraged and kind of welcomed, because I think we can all collectively, sell that message. And in terms of confusion, I think a visitor levy is not a new thing. I think it's worth reminding ourselves of that we all travel and we're all exposed to different rates, and there is a variation within all councils. Some countries, some have percentages, some have fixed rates within their own country, and they operate it, and they have done that for decades. So I think there's still learning, obviously, that we can apply, but it's worth knowing that.
And Fergus has indicated he'd like to come in on this bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I just want to re-emphasise the points made. It's about the flexibility that can be delivered at the local level. The consumer will see through what the levy is if we clearly communicate it. The experience in Europe and elsewhere has shown that, and I think the key thing is to communicate the simplicity of the system delivered at a local level. And also remember, councils regularly speak to each other about these issues, cooperate with each other at different levels, and that will be something that we would want to continue as part of any kind of levy introduction into Scotland. So I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And currently, the scheme cannot have different percentage rates for different types of accommodation. However, the new bill will allow different flat rates for different types of accommodation. Do you have any views on that?
Gareth?
Yep.
Thank you. It comes down to the kind of good taxation principle of proportionality, and I think having that ability to vary the rate depending on type of accommodation is a useful option for those local authorities that want to consider that proportionality when they're designing the scheme. I say that, but there's obviously that's up for their decision making and how they make that with their own local communities. But there's always a balance between achieving proportionality and sort of that simplicity. And I think that's for local authorities to decide and how they design and implement.
Okay.
Thank you, Camilla.
Fulton, I believe you might have had a supplementary in this area. Do you still have that?
Yeah, Convener, thank you, and good morning to the panel, both online and in person. It's not so much a supplementary, Convener, but it's a sort of different question. But it's when I was looking through our briefing papers, I felt this was probably the best place to bring it in. So if you can bear with me, I'm happy to bring it in just now or at the end at your discretion.
Please just go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's probably directed to Gareth. I don't think the other panellists would possibly be in a position to answer, or it probably wouldn't be fair, for them to answer, not that they wouldn't be in a position to. So, Gareth, it's for yourself. It's about if a visitor levy, if this bill does pass and it's introduced, do you see any situation where certain local authorities might be disadvantaged by it financially. If, for example, the various local authorities such as Edinburgh and Glasgow, where you could see the huge appeal of such a levy, would come in. Do you think that other local authorities, such as my own in North Lanarkshire, for example, if they make the decision not to bring it in, or if they make the decision to bring it in, do you think there could be any financial disadvantage for other local authorities, and how could this be remedied by the government or through the bill?
No, thank you for the question. It's really up to, I suppose, local authorities to do that forecasting and to work out whether they are valuing raising enough revenue, or whether they want to design a scheme that works for their local area and getting that balance right between the two. So I think forecasting is part of the equation. And I think you will see from how, I mean, there's 5 local authorities that have advanced the percentage scheme at the moment, and they have all designed it slightly differently. And I think that is just sort of a perfect example of why local discretion is important, because that is designed in collaboration with businesses and with residents and with visitors. And I think it's a good example of localism.
Yeah, and I guess what you're saying there as well is that I think that some of this stuff will need to be seen how it works in the fullness of time. So I do understand that, and I'm asking questions that we don't know how things are going to work out. But I guess what I'm asking is more broadly speaking, if, say, for example, we'll just use examples, say, for example, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, some of the council areas that have been mentioned today and that are represented today, are able to put in schemes that make significant sums of money for them that can be reinvested into local services. But there are other council areas where, the tourism infrastructure, particularly for overnight stays, isn't there, or there to the same extent, and they don't generate that same money back. And then there's that disparity at the end of the financial year and putting back into services. Do you think that's something that the Scottish Government would need to be involved in equalling the playing field, if you like, for want of a better expression?
I'm going to use that favourite word again that we've used, flexibility. And it's looking at I suppose, the comparison between a fixed amount and a percentage. With a percentage, you have it inbuilt that it's future-proofing it, because it will rise or fall depending on the prices. In other words, the success of the visit economy or otherwise. Whereas with a fixed amount, it's static and it will remain the same unless it's changed. And currently, there are stipulations within the current legislation that really elongates that process for change on an already established scheme. And I think that might be hitting at what you're seeing in terms of a potential financial disadvantage, because you're developing a scheme that could potentially erode with inflation over time under a fixed amount, whereas the percentage has that inbuilt protection.
Okay, thanks. That's useful.
Great.
Thanks, Convener.
Thanks very much, Fulton, and thanks for that clarity, Gareth. I'm going to move on to a new topic on where we're going to be seeking clarification of chargeable transactions and third-party operators, and I'm going to bring in Evelyn Tweed for this.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel, and thank you for your answers so far. And my question here is to Ellen, because I want to look at Edinburgh. You're a bit further ahead in the process than others. So, given Edinburgh has already introduced a 5% levy applying to any advance bookings made since October 2025 for stays on or after the 24th of July 2026, will these provisions impact bookings already made through third-party operators?
We have consistently said that we will be any enforcement response will be proportionate and reasonable as well. And we appreciate that the legislation will not be retrospective, but we appreciate that this is the simplest solution for both accommodation providers as well as for the local authority in terms of having this clarification. And therefore, I fully anticipate that we will enforce the legislation as it is laid, as opposed to how it was. It would be very difficult to ask accommodation providers to evidence the fact that at the time of the booking, the law was different. We would then have to ask for even more evidence and clarification points than earlier. So we anticipate, and we have assumed from the start that in these particular cases, if the legislation changes, then we will be able to apply that on all bookings. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so again, it's a case of flexibility
Yes.
and changing with the times.
Absolutely, and working collaboratively with the industry as well. There's understanding this was raised as an issue from industry. We've been doing our best over the last year to try and work through that and find solutions together with industry on how this can be applied in a way that is easy and achievable for all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And now we're going to move on to another area, which is Section 6. We want to talk about that. The Scottish Government may, by regulations, make further provisions about the operation of Parts 2 and 3 of the 2024 Act. And I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey for that.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to everyone. It's just to ask the witnesses if they have a particular view on that issue, that should we require further changes to the visitor levy, is it okay, in your opinion, to conduct that through the secondary legislation process that we have in the Scottish Parliament? Any comments at all on that would be most welcome.
Anybody? Gareth?
Gareth.
You're the main spokesperson here.
I can kick this off. Sure. I mean, as you all know, the secondary legislation process has a little less scrutiny than the other one. So I think it's just making sure that it doesn't circumvent that scrutiny and that understanding and that opportunity for effective and meaningful engagement between the government and stakeholders. So I would still like to have that sort of assurance of that engagement, which I have confidence in the officers and the ministers that they will do that. But yeah, and I think it's fairly common in some sort of legislation to have that ability to refine. And there is this commitment from the government to make this visitor levy work, and I think myself and other local authorities are appreciative of that as well. And that's another reason for why this bill's in front of you today. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else on the...
Anybody else want to come in on that particular one?
I mean, there's still the requirement to consult with everyone on it, but in terms of the scrutiny element of it, it is, as Gareth says, a little bit more diminished than scrutinising a bill in the whole. So if there are no other comments on that, I would leave it at that. Did I see a hand waving there, Convener, in the bottom right hand corner screen? I can't.
Fergus, are you indicating you want to come in? No, okay.
No, all right.
I have a follow-up question to that, Willie, if I can jump in. Yep. And I just wonder, so Gareth, you mentioned that you've been working really well with the Scottish Government on this process. Do you think that that's partly to do with the Verity House Agreement and that kind of commitment to more collaborative co-design approach? And if that's in place, and if we can keep that in place, then that kind of the moment when a bit of secondary legislation comes in, I would like to think if we've got Verity House principles of communication that COSLA and local authorities would be engaged with at an early point in any kind of change.
It's definitely worth raising. I think the Verity House Agreement has delivered a number of successes. I think there's still maybe things to build on and things to improve and to kind of baseline. So I think it's encouraging, definitely encouraging, and we'd like to see more of that. So that would be welcomed.
Okay, great. Ellen.
I suppose just to add to that, I don't know if it's because of the Verity House Agreement. I don't have prior experience of having worked with the Scottish Government on this type of matters, but I do think that the engagement and the exchange of experience and understanding has been very, very good over the last year. I have nothing but praise for Scottish Government in that sense of actually listening and trying to act.
Okay, that's a nice point. We actually have a few minutes left because we've managed time so well. So I just wanted to, I know there were people who indicated they want to come in on anything. If there's anything burning for anyone who's online at the moment that they really want to make sure they get on the record, I've got a few more minutes, dare I say, that you could come in. If you don't have anything, but you think of something afterwards, you can always put that in writing to us. Fergus, was that you indicating to come in?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate the point in terms of the consultation as a result of the amended bill. I think public consultation is critical going forward, and we will certainly, as a council, if we continue with the levy process, we will be going out and speaking to all the stakeholders across the region, which is a large area of Scotland, and it costs quite a considerable amount of money to do across 23 inhabited islands, etc., etc. But it's critical. The key point I want to emphasise is the 18-month period. That is a considerable concern in terms of when something's going to be implemented. So that's, for me, is the real focus in terms of can that be shortened in terms of it, bearing in mind that we have to go out for a full public consultation on this important issue of the levy. But that, I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that and underscoring. So that we've heard that a few times now. Is there, I'm going to come back to you, Fergus, on the 18-month. What would you think would be a reasonable or realistic implementation period that would work better for yourselves? And I hear your point about the 23 inhabited islands and all of that. Yes, I'm familiar with Argyll and Bute.
Yeah, of course, sorry about that. I mean, in terms of it, I don't have a specific figure in mind. I think it could be a shorter period. Obviously, there has to be a period of transition and understanding, but there's a lot of colleagues on the call already going through this process, which we could learn from. System set up. You know, we have a group that talks about the practicalities of the administration of the levy across Scotland, etc. So I believe that period could be considerably shortened, because obviously, you know, we start a public consultation. We cannot trigger that 18-month until that's finished. A decision is made by a council. So a shorter period, but obviously there would have to be a transition time, you know, for going forward. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks very much. Gareth, in the discussions with the government and with colleagues, has there any shorter period been discussed as to what would be reasonable?
At this stage, no.
No, not at this stage. Okay. Okay, very, very briefly, Megan wants to come back in, very briefly.
Thank you very much, Convener. It was on that point, Fergus, if I may, because I appreciate, you know, making it easier for local authorities, but if I could bring it back to the businesses who are going to have to be navigating the implementation period, amending section 17 so that no levy liability arises until both the transaction and the stay occur after the formal commencement date. Would that be something that you would be open to supporting, Fergus, on that point, just in terms of the implementation timeframe itself, just to protect businesses further?
Yes, I mean, critically, we want the simplest system for businesses to administer and for the councils to administer. And I think that's why we're so keen on terms of the fixed rate, in terms of when that could be applied through the transaction, instead of we found a lot of complexity with a percentage rate. When is that applied? When is it a pre-booking time, or is it actually a transaction at the premises? So that's why we're really interested in the fixed rate approach that, you know, can be applied in a more flexible way. So I think we are keen. Obviously, any kind of implementation of it, we want to work with industry, and we'll need a time to do that for our own particular circumstances. My issue was that it's a full 18-month reset from a time we've done extensive consultation and the levy's been introduced elsewhere in the country. And we've learned a lot from that process, talking to lots of different people.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it there. There were other people who did want to come in on the back of this question. Please, if you've got something in addition to communicate to the committee, I'd be really grateful if you put that in writing to us. Many thanks for coming in this morning and contributing to our scrutiny of this piece of legislation. So I'm now going to briefly suspend the meeting for a changeover of the panel. Thank you. In our second panel on the Visitor Levy Amendment Scotland Bill, we'll focus on the views of the tourism industry. And we're joined in the room by Mark Crothall, who is from the Scottish Tourism Alliance, Fiona McConaughey, who is from Booking.com, and we're joined online by Fiona Campbell from the Association of Scotland Self-Caterers, Sheila Gilmore from Visit Arran, and David Weston, who's from the Scottish B&B Association. And I welcome you all to the meeting and thank you for coming to join us today, particularly in light of the short notice and tight timescales for the bill. So on technical aspects, there's no need for you to turn on your microphones. We'll do that for you. And I'm going to start questions, but I don't have mine open. So. Okay. The other thing I wanted to say is that in the interest of time, we have a very short amount of time this morning. So I think some of you might have been watching what was going on before. So I will be reining us all in and directing questions to people. So I think I will just start in the room with Mark, just so you know it's coming to you. And we actually got the same questions pretty much as what we had in the previous panel. So I'd be interested from the industry's perspective, how has engagement worked? What have you discussed with the government and asked them to change? And what progress have you actually seen in relation to this bill coming forth?
Well, thank you, Convener, and good morning, everybody. In relation to our engagement with the government around bringing forward these amendments, I'd have to say it's been exceptional. We've really enjoyed and welcomed the openness and the recognition of the concerns of the industry. The government officials as well have been extremely accommodating and available throughout what has been and seems like a very long period of time. We have, as you know, as an industry, always from the outset of the Visitor Levy Bill, expressed our wish and our desire for a flat fee approach rather than percentage model. So we wouldn't really want to be in the position that we find ourselves in today. But the fact that that's been listened to and we have an expedited bill now which is being taken through Parliament is extremely welcome.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to come in on that and maybe share a different view? Anybody? Fiona, come on in. Oh, Fiona Campbell. Sorry, yes, Fiona Campbell. Sorry, Fiona, you might...
Thanks very much, and good afternoon or good morning where you are. We absolutely welcome the engagement that we have gone through over the last few months. It was absolutely clear, and we have never said that we are against a levy per se. We understand the rationale, but when royal assent happened with the Act, the 2024 Act, it became very clear that unfortunately it was an operational there were operational challenges that were insurmountable. So this bill gives us the real opportunity to amend those challenges and make this more workable. Now, we also really welcome this scrutiny by the committee so that we can get it right. And we also very much welcome this expedited, sped up bill going through Parliament. And it is critical that this is done in this parliamentary session and not shunted to the next so that we can get this right. Because currently, as the Act stands, it is operationally very challenging indeed, / open to legal challenge, and we want to work with the Scottish Government to get it right.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm just going to come back to you on my next question. I'd be interested, so you talk about it's great that it's come forward, the good engagement with the government, and I get a sense that there's a desire for the urgency, but I just wanted to just kind of stress test that. Do you think the urgency is real? And if we pass this amendment bill quickly, in your mind, what would be the biggest risk for getting it wrong? Is there any potential of getting anything wrong in this bill for the tourism economy at this point?
I think that it is critical. Oh, sorry, was that to me?
Yep, that was directed to you, Fiona.
Thanks very much indeed. It is absolutely critical that it is done now, because what we are faced with, certainly in Edinburgh right now, is operationally impossible and also legally challengeable. So nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. We need clarity, we need consistency, and we need certainty from the point of view of operators, from the point of view of local authorities, and from the point of view of guests. So this is our opportunity to get it right. We have now brought forward this amazing expedited bill. We're doing this extra fast. We are all up to speed. The brilliant thing is about this is that we have
too far away on another part of the world, I think, maybe. Okay, so we're losing you, Fiona.
I do not want anybody to be in.
Yeah, okay, we lost a bit of what you said there, but I think we got the gist of it. Okay, I'm going to move on. We're going to move into a new theme, which is changes to the basis on which a visitor levy can be changed, and I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to all panel members. I'm hoping to find out a little bit more about how multiple schemes may operate within a local authority area and or not. My understanding is that we need this system to be easy to understand, easy to process, simplified. So I see a couple of nodding heads. So Mark, you're looking at me, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Flexibility has been a word of the day. I would say simplicity is the most important word of the day, and consumer has also been mentioned as well. And we have to continue to put our feet in the consumer's shoes, as well as obviously thinking about business, and the scope and scale of the business capacities, capabilities is very varied. It's fine if you're a large corporate business, you have that sort of infrastructure where you can navigate a variety of schemes, but that's not what we want. We need something that's straightforward, simple, easy to communicate, and it gives absolute confidence and reassurance to the visitor, to the business, and actually to the local authority as well. And having a multiple scheme option is definitely not something that we would advocate at all. We are very much of the view that a single approach across the country, giving the local authorities the flexibility to still set what that rate might be in terms of the flat rate, is absolutely their decision to make. So we're not removing that option, but having these variable per person per nights and flat fees will cause a lot more harm and unintended consequences than good. And I think you'll see the Visit Scotland submission as well, I know, also recommends or raises concern around multiple approaches too. And I'm sure Fiona, from a booking platform perspective, would have share the same views as me.
Thank you. Fiona, on that note, please.
Yes, thank you. Simplicity really is key here. We are, as Booking.com, a large global platform. We operate tourism, taxes, visitor levies across the world of different shapes and sizes. If it's not simple, it is then difficult for us. Even though we are a large organisation, we're then having to look at the complexities very much at that local level, and then having to magnify further into that local level just adds additional complexity. I can obviously speak from a platform perspective, but bear in mind that many operators will list not only on Booking.com, but multiple different platforms. And different platforms will then have different ways in which they show the levy. So for us, we attribute 5% of the stay to a levy. So at the moment, if there are differentials with the existing percentage model, then actually we could then potentially overcharge. We've taken this specific model to align with other platforms, but bear in mind you've got platforms, you've then got hotels will have their own back-end systems. You then have smaller businesses that will then be having to display their rates on their direct channels. And there's various other ways in which people are actually putting their prices out there and making it clear for the consumer. And I really agree there with Mark. The consumer really needs to have clarity as to what they're having here. This is governed by overarching consumer law. They need to know what that price is, and it needs to be clear up front. So if we're having issues with that display just because of how the percentage is currently calculated, we need to just make it as simple as possible. Try and not have that variation as much as possible, because ultimately then that leads back down to the accommodation provider and to the consumer to then make it easy for them to be able to administer and also for them to have clarity as to what they're paying.
Well, thank you for that. I did reference Glasgow City Council in the previous committee panel, and the operational risks of a complex system that could impact pricing, the variable lengths of stay, and of course multiple booking platforms that we've just been discussing. Have you had any contact with local authorities in relation to the contingency modelling that they may or may have not done? Has there been any back and forward between industry sector and local authorities? Because again, I'm assuming that that will be really important in terms of mitigating risks. And I don't know, maybe yourself, Mark, or Fiona, or someone online perhaps.
I can jump in first if you want. Yes, I mean, absolutely. We've done as much as we possibly can to engage with local authorities right across the country. We've been very much a proactive approach to that. We want local authorities to understand the risks and the complexities. We also have always said, and will continue to say, that no authority should introduce a levy until that risk assessment has actually been done on potential implication of customer footfall, and variables that come with the different types of accommodation, etc. And certainly not to commit to spending money before they've raised it. We do believe that the flat fee approach, though, still does offer the flexibility that they want in terms of being able to project revenues. And you referenced Glasgow earlier. We feel that the number that they've intimated is clear. They've obviously got plans for that. And actually, in a simple calculation, if you divide it by the number of bed nights, you will end up with a figure that gives you that target figure. So that assurance is there, is important. But risk is critical. It's great to see that certain authorities have actually commissioned the pieces of work through Argyll, through EcosGen. We know Fife are doing the same, Dumfries and Galloway, because ultimately, where is the tipping point? How much can that authority accommodate, and at what price point do you, should you choose to go ahead, set that flat fee? And you'll hear, I'm sure, from others, and you've seen in our submission. We also think that in terms of fairness, which has actually been raised a number of occasions and is right to do so, that we need to see a fairness in proportionality, so we're not penalising those who are in the lower budgeted end accommodation. So the only variable would be where you would have a sector to product type which sits at a lower bracket to everybody else.
Helpful, and just in the interest of time, because I know that there's lots of colleagues looking to come in, there has been discussion and debate regarding whether there should be a fixed rate per unit as opposed to fixed rate per person. Now, my understanding is that the sector has been quite critical of this, saying that they strongly oppose per person charging because it's intrusive, unworkable and likely to generate errors and disputes. So I'm keen to hear from our online colleagues as well, online panel members. So Fiona, David or Sheila, I'm not sure who wants to take this, but has anyone got any specifics on per unit or per person?
I think Fiona indicated, yeah. Come on in, Fiona Campbell.
Thanks very much indeed, and apologies if you lose me. I'm in Cambodia, so just bear with the connectivity. It is very difficult, specifically in a self-catering context, to know exactly who's in your premises. If you say, for example, host, you have a property that has 5 bedrooms that can potentially have 10 people staying, and you don't necessarily go and check every night who's in the accommodation, it is actually unenforceable. And when something's unenforceable, it becomes incompetent. Again, if I go and stay in Edinburgh, which I do frequently, I will book for two people in a room, but I'll just go stay myself. Or perhaps my husband will come and stay with me. It again becomes very, very difficult for the accommodation provider to manage that. Again, if you're in a campsite and you're in a tent, how many people are in the tent on day 1, day 2, etc.? So I think the flat rate per unit gives you that simplicity.
Fiona, and right descriptions there in terms of how complicated that it really could turn out to be for those who are actually having to administer it. I don't have any further questions, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to move on to the next area that we want to discuss with you, and that is actually the same area. I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin. He's joining us online with a couple of questions. And I know, David, you had indicated you wanted to come in on previous questions. So maybe there's something here that we can go to you first on.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to the witnesses today. Now, a similar question to the last panel. I got a unanimous answer from the last panel, and I might get a unanimous answer again, but in a different way. Just to ask witnesses whether they feel that the legislation should set a maximum amount that can be charged per night.
Anybody want to take that? Mark?
Yes, I do. I think we should be capping and having that boundary set because, how long's a piece of string? And at this moment in time, there is other flexibility proposed within the bill to allow the government scrutiny there, and that could always be reviewed. But the risk is that if you set an unlimited amount of money, then obviously, what does the consumer comes back to the consumer concern again. So I think if you've done your risk analysis and you've done your assessments and you know what your projections are for your investment, you'll have a good indication of what that number might be in terms of charge. And at this moment in time, what we're seeing across those who have actually progressed their levy interest so far, the number isn't huge. But if it were to suddenly be an unended number, then you have to put something that stops that from happening.
Okay, I'm going to do the same thing I did in the last panel, Mark, which is to see if anyone disagrees with Mark Hruthel's response there. Okay, Fiona.
To come in and say that I think it's, we'll come back with some written evidence, but I think it's worth looking at the technical aspects of this and how possible this is. I agree with the principle there, but I think it's definitely worth looking at the technical aspects and whether this is possible. I know just on the nightly cap, and this came up a lot with the previous Act, issues came up further down the line. So I think it's worth checking. So I'll come back with some written evidence on that, whether it's possible.
In terms of the kind of technical aspect of setting a maximum.
A maximum cap on a fixed fee.
Okay, that would be great. Mark, do you want to ask your next question if you think it's relevant to this panel?
Yep. And I'll probably address this to Mark initially. And it was to talk about the options that would be open to the councils that have already approved and announced their schemes. And I know that the STA proposed that those councils be allowed to hold potentially a shorter consultation period. But in speaking to the witnesses in the previous panel, their contention wasn't necessarily that the consultation period was the biggest issue, but it was the 18-month implementation window that was a bigger issue. And I just wonder what your views were on the councils who've already set out their proposals and some of the comments from the previous panel as well and relating to that.
Very conscious that a lot of work has already been done and a lot of consultation has been had with industry. If we take Aberdeen as an example, I'm very aware of our industry colleagues up there looking to get hold of a levy so they can start to actually put it to good use. So our proposal would be, or our belief is, where we already have those authorities in that limbo state, that it shouldn't require a lengthy period of time to flip from what is simply a percentage to determining what that flat fee would be, and that therefore would enable everything else to progress accordingly. The legislation says from the outset that the 18-month requirement is there for and that's for good reason, to allow preparation, communication, and we still see in Edinburgh, although things have moved on, a number of businesses who are still not yet on the bus, and there is a lot of communication and hard work still to be done. So we wouldn't want to lessen that. There are other issues of around contracting business as well. So if you've got those tour operators, there is a time frame of when that activity works. But in the case of those who have already set their stall out in terms of a percentage, would just require a very simple, shortened period of consultation to say it's not 5%, it's £4 or £5, and I think that would be acceptable, because we do want to get the money into play to enable activity to happen and improve the quality of the tourism offer.
Okay. Mark, I just want to bring in a few people that have indicated. So, David, I don't know if you want to come in on this one, but yeah.
Oh, hello. Thank you. I wanted to earlier just come in to support some of the other points on simplicity, what Mark said, and Fiona McConaughey said on simplicity. That's very important to keep anything simple. That's why the flat rate is much better than the percentage for accommodation owners. Also, on the change to allow local authorities to change between a percentage and a flat rate, I think it's really important to make that process as easy as possible. If there's been a consultation in principle on a visitor levy, and then we're just the local authority simply moving from a percentage to a flat rate, it shouldn't need the whole process to be restarted again. So if that can be made as simple as possible, that would help, because it's the percentage that, as my colleagues have said, has caused so many problems. In the B&B sector specifically, it means you've got to price breakfast for the first time, deduct it, work out the VL, then add it. If you sell through a third party like an online travel agent, it makes it difficult for the accommodation owner to work out the VL. We've been through all these issues with through the expert panels and things. And in fact, some of us said this in October 2023 to this committee. We said, don't bring in a percentage for that reason. So making this allowing a switch to a flat fee is really important. And Convener, one of your earliest questions in this session was, is there a danger of something going wrong with this amendment? I would say no, all the danger is the other way, is the issues that the basic legislation raised caused problems. The issues that would be put right by this amendment are much more likely to save problems rather than cause any problems.
Great, thanks very much. I've got Fiona Campbell and then Fiona McConaughey.
Thanks very much indeed. I think the 18-month implementation period is absolutely critical in terms of ensuring that businesses are ready to implement the visitor levy in whatever area that they choose to do so. I don't think that's up for discussion as part of this bill. I think the point that we really need to emphasise is that as industry, we are keen to support local authorities to flip to a flat fixed amount. At that point, if a local authority has already gone through the 12-week consultation, we would be entirely supportive of a shortened, perhaps 4-week consultation in order to change the charging model. I think that's the bit that we're talking about here. The 18-month implementation period needs to remain. And on that point, I think in our written submission, we have made it very, very clear that we have real concerns around Section 14 and Section 17 in terms of local authorities bringing in the 18-month period, but then transitioning. So, for example, Edinburgh being a case in point, they've used Section 14 in order to bring forward the date in which they could start charging, which was very clearly protected against by the Parliament in the original Act. So we think we really need a change to Section 17, and I think that's something that we would really value the committee to consider.
Okay.
I don't want to go into any more detail because obviously we've got a shortened time, but happy to help.
Thanks. Fiona McConaughey.
Yes, I just want to make the point on the fact that industry throughout, with the previous consultation and implementation periods, have been engaging to make clear how long systems will take to change. I know that Booking.com were engaging with City of Edinburgh Council and have engaged with other local authorities as well on this. If there is then to be a change, I agree with Fiona's point there on a 4-week consultation, because most of the points were have been covered by the original 12-week consultation. But, for example, if it is a flat fee model, that's something that, as Booking.com, we're able to accommodate, and so we'd actually be able to build that a lot faster. And ultimately, we will be then providing that clarity as to how long it takes for industry to build these changes. I think throughout, industry has been trying to engage and be very realistic on those timelines. This isn't a matter of industry kind of kicking the can down the road, trying to prevent the levy from happening. We're just trying to very clearly state what is possible for different systems to be updated. And we can provide more evidence on that with the final legislation. Thank you.
Right. Thanks very much. Okay, going to move on to the next theme, which is around additional flexibility and different fixed amounts models. And I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. You've all touched on this morning the importance of the flexibility, the simplicity, and how that's all communicated. So is there anything required within the bill which will help the visitor levy from stop being so confused? Because that's one area that you've all touched on, that there's a confusion across that. So is there anything that we need to put in the bill that will stop that confusion? And are there risks about the flexibility for local authorities that could mean that that confusion does have an implication on the businesses and on the consumer? If maybe Mark wants to start off with that.
I think that we have to remove the flat fee per person option. We've conducted a series of roundtables with the different sector groups and accommodation providers across the spectrum, from hosteling to large operators. We've also consulted with a number of local authorities as well, and I think there is a genuine consensus that that option, as long as it remains, will become more of a problem, and it just needs to be removed altogether. So you have that choice then of flat fee per transaction, which is again the one that we would strongly recommend for all the reasons we've said already. And we know obviously Edinburgh are still choosing to pursue the percentage option, and Stirling as well. But the appetite, we genuinely believe that there is an appetite to flip to a flat approach if the assumption or the ability to do that doesn't require a start again process there. So, but that's the biggest concern. You know, the confusion still lies when you put too many options on the table. Can understand why it was there, but actually consultation, as I say, far and wide across the sector would say, just take it away, because it's why muddy the water with something that is just not practically doable and will cause more problems.
Sheila, you indicated you wanted to come on this.
Hello, sorry. Yes, I was just going to say exactly the same as Mark has just said. I think that the way to keep that simplicity is to remove that per person option, have just a per unit of accommodation for all the reasons that have been explained by Mark and by Fiona Campbell, and keep it simple that way.
Thanks very much for that. Sheila, come on in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Just to say I concur with everything that's been said, but also to say that I think any confusion arises through a lack of communication. And I think a flat rate fee is a much simpler process to communicate to visitors that are coming, and certainly for businesses to deal with as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Fiona.
Yes. Thank you. I also just want to note for the committee that Fiona Campbell and myself, along with officials from Scottish Government and Visit Scotland, wrote the business guidance that was made available in September of last year. I do know that work is ongoing now to update that according to the draft bill, and then that will be amended again. And that's vital to make sure that businesses understand what they are dealing with in terms of legislation, and to translate that into something that's usable for businesses, especially small businesses that, unlike us, who are talking about this a lot, and I'm sure our loved ones are a little bored of us talking about visitor levies. But for those people that don't have that constant engagement on levies, can understand what they're doing and what's expected of them. And I think that's critical here. Thank you.
Great, that's great to hear about some co-design going on there. I'm going to come back to you, Alexander. Do you want to pick up Any other questions?
I think most of them have been actually answered, Convener, so thank you for that.
Thanks very much. Fiona Campbell, you want to come in briefly on this, and then I'm going to move on to bringing in Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you very much indeed. And I absolutely commend the Scottish Government on this particular approach. This is the first time I've seen real partnership policy making, and it is absolutely to be applauded. And I've been delighted to work with a really strong team at the Scottish Government and obviously industry to get to where we've got to. What I would also say is that local authorities have come to us now and said, right, we've now been given this huge amount of flexibility. What does that mean? And what we want to do, and what we have done, is have these roundtable meetings with local authorities, with industry, to say, what does good look like? And good does not look like 32 different variations on a theme. Good looks like simple, clear, absolutely understood and underpinned by a robust economic impact assessment at all times. But so what we have found is that we're looking at fixed amounts here. They're not tiered bands, fixed fees, this, that, the next thing. We're talking about fixed amounts, and that is the critical thing. So we've looked at what good looks like, and we're happy to continue working with Scottish Government and local authorities to encourage local authorities to go for the best option, which currently looks like an affordable option and a standard option. You can then add in options in terms of regional variations, urban, rural. You can indeed entertain the idea of perhaps, charging residents less, 0.5%, half price, or whatever it is. So, but I think we just need to really focus on simplicity here. And it goes back to what the First Minister said at the Scottish Tourism Alliance conference last year. We need simplicity. Flexibility is a wonderful thing, but it can end up in huge amounts of confusion and challenge. So I think we are here to help local authorities discuss what good might look like for their different area, because you're going to have a completely different best option for Edinburgh to Highland or indeed South Ayrshire. I think that's really important. But this partnership policy making, helping people to understand what that simplicity could look like to make this work for local authorities, guests and operators is critical at this point.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Fiona. And I like that you called them guests rather than consumers. Okay, we're going to move on to a new theme, clarification of chargeable transactions and third-party operators. I'm going to bring in Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to the panel for all your answers so far. Very informative as usual. I'm going to ask the same question to you that I asked to Ellen about Edinburgh and the 5% levy that has already been applied to certain bookings up to 24th July 2026. Will these provisions impact bookings already made through third-party operators?
It, of course, will have a bearing, but we would hope there won't be cancellation. A lot of the contracting has been done. It gets done by the third-party operators, 18 months out, and sometimes even longer than that. I know many of the DMCs have been working very closely with the hoteliers in particular. We can't afford that business to get lost, but that's not to say that that those who booked may choose to change their mind. But it goes back to simplicity. We want to be transparent. We want to be a country where it's easy to do business. And my chair, Rebecca Brooks, who's also chair of UK Inbound and Abbey UK, she has commented on several times now, Scotland is not seen to be the easiest place to do business with at the moment because of all of the other things that go on, and this is just another layer that makes it a bit more challenging. So they're not going to go. The bookings are made, but we need to make sure that any future bookings become a much more appealing and a more attractive and easy to transact at the point of sale. And of course, what this amendment does is it protects that commercial sensitivity. We all know what we're doing, and everybody will know what they're doing at the end of the day.
Anybody else? Okay. Mark was able to speak for everybody on that one. Okay, we're going to move on to our next theme. It's around Section 6, this section is the section where it says the Scottish Government may, by regulations, make further provisions about the operations of Part 2 and 3 of the 2024 Act. And I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey for questions in this area.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning to everyone on the panel. It's just to ask the same question I asked the previous panel. Would you like to offer any views on further changes to the legislation coming through secondary legislation through the Parliament? Could you offer an opinion or some views on the appropriateness or otherwise of that?
Fiona McConaughey.
Thank you. Yes, I echo some of the points that were made by others in the previous session. I think that this does make sense as long as full consultation is actually made ahead of time. Here we are talking about primary legislation to make amendments that probably had that power been put in the original Act. We'd be discussing secondary legislation, which I think would be far more preferable. But as long as those changes are obviously made with full engagement with industry and local authorities, etc., then I think that that's a welcome change.
Thanks, Fiona. Any other comments, Mark?
I totally echo that. It's about getting it right, and actually having that flexibility to address something where, if it's not going well, we can change it without going through a lengthy process. I think I had hair when this process started, I haven't got much more to lose. But things will change. We live in a very volatile world, and obviously we need to be sure that Scotland can still compete as well. And if it does require some simple intervention and adjustment, that's good. But the relationships that have been established through this process between industry, government, the local authorities and the officials, I think have, been founded, and they're very strong now. So that trust and I guess the evidence base that we can bring forward is certainly far greater and I think respected than it was previously.
Thank you.
Perhaps.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I don't see any other
I think Fiona Campbell wants to come in. Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to absolutely concur with that, I think it's critical. We've seen that this has required primary legislation to make the changes necessary. This is the first time that we've had a visitor levy in Scotland. It's so critical to get it right. If we need to make more tweaks, then this is the opportunity to do that. So I think industry certainly absolutely welcomes the ability for the Scottish Government to intervene. And just going back to a comment from the convener earlier, that Mark does represent us because industry now talks with a completely united voice. So you're not going to get people on this panel or elsewhere saying something different because we are talking with one voice.
For that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. And it's great to hear that the previous legislation, while it had some missing bits in it, I heard from what Mark said that the relationships have been established, they're strong, and the trust is there. I'm paraphrasing you a bit. But I just wanted to, we've got a wee bit more time. I just wanted to ask, just so we don't miss anything, and maybe Mark, I'll come to you because you seem to be the voice of the group. What's not in the bill that should be there?
What's not in the bill?
You can say it's perfect as it is.
No, I don't think anything is ever perfect, and I think what we have to do is to continue to have the flexibility to evolve and look at legislation and policy as the industry and the environment changes. I mean, I also have the privilege of co-chairing the Industry Leadership Group, which is the strategic body responsible for Scotland's tourism strategy, Scotland Outlook 2030. We're at the halfway point of that strategy. It's a pivotal time. You will all have had, and if you've not yet read, our election manifesto documents, which sort of sets out the opportunity for even greater growth and economic contribution from this sector. But it requires the right policy and the right application of that policy, best possible policy to be a world leader in 21st century tourism. We are very much under the spotlight. I am regularly contacted by colleagues now across the UK and further afield about what Scotland is doing with the visitor levy. So we're in that spotlight for all the right reasons, and at sometimes, unfortunately, for the wrong reason. But knowing that we've got flexibility in the future in this relationship to be able to amend and change, I think, is one of the biggest wins from this change of legislation. But it does go back to simplification and communication. And if we can't simplify, our conference is only a couple of weeks away, so that will be a year from when the First Minister said, let's make sure it's simple. And it's obviously taken a bit of pain to get to the simplification piece. But partnership working is key, and I think making sure there's more of that continues on through this process, and we continue to evolve and change and flex where necessary is going to be absolutely essential.
Great. Okay, thanks. And two more folks want to come in on this. Fiona, Campbell, and then Sheila.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, just going back to one of our critical points is we would, as industry, prefer removal of the per person per night option, because it is operationally unworkable, and there's no point in going into something when you know it's operationally unworkable. And the other point is around that section 14 and 17 of the legislation regarding transitional arrangements versus the 18-month implementation. The levy liability should not arise until the scheme's formal commencement date following the full 18-month implementation period. We request that section 17 be amended to give businesses certainty as per the original intention of the parliamentary bill.
Okay, great, thanks. And Sheila.
Just just very small thing. I just wanted to say, I mean, this has been very, very interesting, and really appreciate the chance to contribute. But I also want to feel there's a little bit of confusion around the exemptions as well. And I think there could be a little bit more clarification needed there, particularly for people living in urban and rural and island areas who are having to travel for all sorts of reasons, but not necessarily for jollies for their holidays. And I think that needs to be taken account of if you're travelling for hospital accommodation and things, and you're having to stay overnight in hotels for treatments. I think you need to take account of all of that. And it maybe only seems a small thing, but I can assure you from an island perspective, it's not a small thing. And we really need some clarification guidance given to our local authorities for that.
Okay, thanks very much for that point. And I think it was good to hear the local authorities in the previous session said they talk to each other. So yes, it would be good to have the guidance, and it would be good that they talk to each other. Certainly the likes of Argyll and Bute, having people maybe go to Glasgow for hospital appointments, as you say, would be good to get clear on that, not having that additional cost potentially. Okay, that concludes our questions. So thank you so much for coming in this morning to share the important message of simplicity in the legislation. And also I think it was great to hear at the beginning that you're very appreciative of the collaboration with the Scottish Government and the work that's been taking place over the last year. So I'm now going to suspend the meeting to allow for a changeover of panel. Thanks very much. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government on the Scottish Budget, and we're joined by Shona Robeson, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government, Ellen Lever, who's the Acting Director for Local Government, and Ian Story, who is the Head of Local Government Finance at the Scottish Government. And I welcome you all to the meeting. There's no need for you to operate your microphones. We'll do that for you. And I'd like to invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a brief opening statement.
Okay, thanks, Convener, and thanks for the opportunity to make some brief opening remarks. This year's budget invests in the well-being of our society and seeks to ease the pressure on families and family budgets by continuing and expanding the best cost of living support package available anywhere in the UK. In terms of local government, we've made significant joint investment in the engagement process throughout the financial year, and the local government settlement delivers what I'd describe as a fair outcome for councils. It provides a real terms increase in the local government settlement, including £253 million of unrestricted general revenue grant. And I guess whilst I could have considered targeting all or some of that increase at social care, I chose to provide it flexibly as possible to councils and give them full discretion on how to allocate that to meet local priorities. I also confirm my intention to provide councils with full discretion over council tax, the most frequent request of COSLA leaders throughout our extensive engagement. When I appeared before this committee to give evidence on the 25-26 budget, the local government settlement was just over £15 billion. In this year's budget, the local government settlement for 26-27 is £15.7 billion. That represents an increase of £650.9 million, or 4.3% in cash terms. In real terms, it's the equivalent to an increase of 2%. Those figures represent a true like-with-like comparison and are transparently set out in Table 4.15 of the Scottish Budget. Additional funding was, of course, made available to councils throughout the year, as it was in every previous year and invariably in the years to come as well. But to factor in such funding on 2025-26 without the crystal ball to confirm what will happen in 2026-27 does not provide a like-with-like comparison and risks being misleading. It's also not possible to also know or second guess what else will happen over the course of the spending review process, as it sets out high level spending envelopes for portfolios to support medium term planning. And those envelopes are intended to provide multi-year planning assumptions, but they don't represent multi-year budget allocations. And I recognise that those envelopes will be extremely challenging for local government, as they are for all public services, but I offer the committee a few points of context. Firstly, the Scottish Government remains committed to working with councils and COSLA to ensure the sustainability of local services, including exploring the role for local government in delivering our broader public service reform agenda. Secondly, the portfolio approach adopted for the spending review does not take into account the impact of in-year transfers. And I've also baselined over £2 billion into the local government settlement since the Verity House agreement was published. But it remains the case that hundreds of millions of funding in the health and education portfolio spending envelopes is likely to be transferred to local government over time to support joint priorities. Convener, I appreciate that this may sound like warm words, but I believe the evidence supports my case here. The 2022 spending review indicated that there would be a 2026-27 core revenue allocation of £10.7 billion. By contrast, the Scottish Budget delivers almost £14 billion. Finally, I'd just like to acknowledge that the Scottish Budget also sets out a strong non-domestic rates package in the context of our revaluation. I'd remind the committee that the Scottish Parliament welcomed the move to 3-year revaluations, and that revaluations are administered by assessors who are independent of Scottish Government and of local government. That was widely welcomed at the time. With average growth in rateable value of 12.23%, The Scottish Budget confirms that I have lowered the basic, intermediate and higher property rates, delivering the lowest basic property rate since 2018-19. I've also maintained the most generous small business support relief anywhere in the UK or Northern Ireland. And it is true that some rateable values have increased. That's why we've introduced transitional reliefs to ensure that the increases in net liabilities will be capped significantly lower than the percentages often quoted. So in total, the budget supports a domestic rates relief package worth an estimated £864 million in 2026-27 as a result of the measures in the Scottish Budget. The total revenues raised from NDR will actually be 6% lower than pre-COVID. Convener, I hope these points are helpful to set context for this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much for giving us that overview. And I just wanted, you kind of touched on one of the points I'm going to, some of the points I'm going to ask about. So I'm going to start our area of questions around the local government allocation and the spending review. So the committee called for the budget to recognise the challenges of increased demand for council services, and in particular social care delivery. And you pointed out in the opening statement that you had chosen to give flexibly so that councils had a choice as to how they were going to fund that area. But COSLA made it clear that in its view, it doesn't have a sense that there is a recognition and an increased demand for social care delivery. So I just wonder what your thoughts are there.
Well, COSLA's ask was for £750 million of new money for social care for 26-27. I mean, that is more than the entirety of all of the resource consequentials for the whole spending review period that the Scottish Government has available. So, they're that just didn't exist in that quantum. So then, in terms of what did exist, the £250 million, I could have said that's for social care, and I could have then pointed to say that money's for social care. But then, what local government would have said is, well, we're supposed to be getting away from ring fencing, and you should be putting, you should be giving us flexibility. So, my decision was that it was better to put the £253 million in the general revenue account, and local government can spend it on social care, or they can spend it on other priorities as they see fit, and they also have full discretion over council tax. It's given the outlook, and our spending review outlook is only what we know we have in front of us from the UK spending review, which is very tight. And we therefore can only put those assumptions out on the basis of what we know. But I want to just re-emphasise the point, Convener, that no spending review in history from any government has ever remained as was set out, because funding shifts, there's an election coming up, and a general election in 2029, I suspect that will lead to additional funding flowing. And, history tells us that assumptions are assumptions, but actually the actual funding available moves significantly. And I set all that out in my letter to COSLA to give some assurance around the flat cash spending outlook. And, I'll continue to give that reassurance.
Okay. I think that's helpful and important to understand that request is a high amount of money, 750 million, and as you say, that didn't exist. And I think also that part about recognising the request around ring fencing, that's certainly something that we've been quite involved in calling for. Moving on to this is kind of, I think, our annual conversation. It's kind of changed scope a little bit of it, but around how the budget figures get set out. So in the statement to Parliament, you use the budget-to-budget comparison, but the budget includes autumn budget revision to budget comparison, and they tell different stories. One has a slightly rosier picture than the other, and I'm just concerned that could be confusing for the public and also inhibit, I think you mentioned the word transparency in your opening statement, inhibit that transparency that we're looking for here. So just if you could speak to which comparison you think is really the baseline for council spending power next year.
Well, first thing I'd say is that all commentators acknowledge it's a real terms increase. It's then whether you compare to ABR or whether you compare to last year's budget. And with the local government settlement, because of the number of in-year transfers and in-year funding that shifts, I agree with SPICE. So SPICE on the very front page, they say, comparing the budget document 26-27 to the previous budget document, as SPICE has done in the past, we see both cash and real terms increases in the overall revenue allocation to local government. And I think in the SPICE blog, they set out why you can't compare to the ABR. And if you look, there are two fundamental things here that is why the comparisons are different, because if you compare it to the ABR, you're then comparing it to two significant funding moves within 25-26. The first is the £144 million for employers' national insurance contributions that was added to the 25-26 budget following publication. And then on top of that, you have circa £109 million for pay that likewise was added. So though that inflated, of course, the ABR position. So, of course, if you compare it to the ABR with that additional funding in it, it's going to give you a different comparison than if you compare budget to budget. Similarly, there will be movements within 26-27, some of which we know, some of which we don't know, that again will shift that comparator to the 27-28 budget. So my contention here is, as SPICE have set out, is that because of the uniqueness of local government, it is very, you can't really compare to ABR. And we've set out, and I would point people to table 4.15 in the budget document. That sets out all the areas of funding that move for transparency. So, I've tried to, that's why we have that table, in order to be able to show why it is we've come, we're saying what we're saying, rather than comparing to the ABR, which includes, we didn't know, for example, the employer's national insurance contribution money was going to, first of all, come and what level it was going to be. So to compare it to that, when that funding came after the draft budget, is, it's not comparing apples with apples. So that is the position and why we've done it. We've done it like that for many years because of the uniqueness with the local government budget. And, SPICE seem to think that that's, a reasonable way to compare.
Okay, thanks. And you think, so you pointed to a table, I couldn't find it in my papers, 4.5.1. Yes, 1.5. Do you feel that that's sufficient? Because I think it's a piece around the confusion here.
We put that table in for that very reason, so that we could point to it and say, look, here is the position. I've been really clear about the employer's national insurance and the pay issues that, between them, you're talking about over £250 million. But those two elements that came after the budget was published in year, £250 million, is going to shift the comparison if you compare the budget to ABR. And what we don't know at this point is what additional funding may end up coming through the 26-27. So you've got to have a point, you've got to have a fixed point, I guess, to compare like with like. Whereas other budgets, it's more straightforward, because although there might be a little bit of in-year movement, it's not of the magnitude that you have with local government. It's around the edges, and that's fine. But for local government, it's material, and that's why we've tried to set that out.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to now touch on the spending review. So the spending review shows plans for the next 3 years, and it suggests that local government settlement could be almost £500 million smaller in real terms by 2028 to 29. And I think I do recall you mentioning that last week when you were here. But other budget lines such as health, social justice, transport, they actually see real terms increases. So I'm just wondering how you imagine we're going to fix what could potentially become quite a big hole. Are you imagining that there's more revenue raising opportunities coming, that councils can find that £500 million?
So first of all, let me say and reiterate that it's a guide, but it won't be the final budget or settlement for local government. And it also, when I pointed out what had happened at the last comparable point was the 2022 spending review, and the difference between the figures of what was a flat cash outlook at that point as well of 10.7 billion for 26-27 is now almost 14 billion. So that's 11, 12, almost 3 billion difference of actual compared to what was foreseen in terms of outlook, which was flat cash. Obviously, that is not what transpired. Now, the shift might not be of that magnitude, because that obviously also takes into account the resetting of budgets when there was a change of UK government, and the Chancellor reset budgets in line with, because they hadn't been set in line with inflation, so she reset budgets, which is very welcome. So there is that element, but nevertheless, even setting that aside, there would have still been a material change and difference compared to the spending review. The other point is that the portfolio approach adopted for the spending review doesn't take into account the impact of in-year transfers. So that flat cash outlook, there will be in-year transfers that again make that position look different. And then I guess finally, convener, there is a truth here that, like the rest of the public sector, there will have to be transformation. There will have to be a different approach to the way services are delivered. The health service is being challenged to do that at pace. All of our public bodies are being challenged to do that. Headcount is going to reduce for operating costs and corporate costs. And local government will have to find its path of how it looks at things like shared services, for example. So the 3 Ayrshire councils are very far ahead. They're in very advanced discussions about taking a fairly maximalist approach to sharing services across the 3 Ayrshire councils. But there are other groups of local authorities similarly looking at that. And also there are some local authorities that provide services for their neighbours, and there has been considerable savings from that. So, and then that's before we get into digital automation, all of that. So, we want to support local government to help it to up the pace of some of that change, because the rest of the public sector is doing just that. In terms of the areas that you referred to, I mean, we made a very clear commitment around, the passing on of health resource consequentials, and we have put in additional funding in order to tackle waiting lists in the NHS, and all of that flows through. And social security, of course, is the legislation in Parliament that demands the inflationary uplifts to social security spending that was agreed unanimously by Parliament in the legislation. So some of those are kind of fixed costs, if you like. All I can say is, we will make sure we work with local government around all of these things, but there will need to be local government will also have to play its part in changing the way things are done.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think I recall in evidence sessions that we were doing before the winter break, a member of the panel talking about the kind of concern that if people on the ground, constituents are kind of feeling like they're not really getting the services, that can give ground to unrest. Do you have any concerns about that?
I mean, it's really important that services are provided in a timely fashion and of quality. So, social care, I would just make the point that we're providing, I think, that £2.3 billion funding into social care, and of course we're supporting the real living wage. So it's not that we're, and actually that investment in social care goes well beyond the commitment made in Parliament a few years ago in terms of the trajectory of the increase in social care spend. It goes well beyond that by about 500 million, if I remember correctly. So, I understand the importance of local services here, and it's important that we work with local government to focus on how to make sure those services are maintained, but they might need to look a bit different in terms of how they're provided, in the same way as all other parts of the public sector are looking at, delivering things in a different way. And that's just the reality of where we are in terms of making sure with all the demands and the demographic challenges, that we can change services in a way that's going to be able to meet that demand. Staying the same and doing things in exactly the same way is not going to do that. So that has to be an important component. And things like the Invest to Save fund, we're trying to oil the wheels of some of that, and local government will get access to that as well. So.
Great, thanks very much. We're going to move on to a new theme, council tax, and I'm going to bring in Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and officials. Good to see you here today. It's really good to hear, Cabinet Secretary, that local authorities will have full discretion over council tax, and you've urged local authorities to translate the settlement into reasonable decisions on council tax also. However, it has been mooted that a fifth of councils plan to raise council tax by over 10%. What would you say to that, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, thanks. So the question, I think, as I've said, I've provided over £250 million of extra revenue to support local services. Now, I don't underestimate the challenge financial environment that everybody is facing. But, I think compared to, you look at the settlements for local government over the years, that's a pretty big increase of completely discretionary, flexible funding. I think it actually might be one of the highest general revenue.
Highest except for last year.
Highest except for last year. Okay, so the last 2 years we've, given local government a pretty significant increase in that general revenue grant, and that's where they say they want the money because it's flexible. So I would hope that, given that there would be, a responsible and they would minimise any proposed increases in council tax, given that funding. Now, I know local authorities will be in differing positions. We have been giving particular support to some of the smaller local authorities where, again, we think they need to get very much into the shared service space because they're trying to support services with a very low council tax base because of their size. So there are some particular challenges for the smaller authorities, and we're engaging with them very directly. So I would hope we would see reasonable positions on council tax given the funding that is being made available.
Thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary. And are you concerned at all about the impact on communities and households of increasing council tax at a time when satisfaction with council services is reducing?
Well, we are very cognisant of the impact on household budgets, which is why a good bit of the budget itself is trying to enhance some of those supports. So whether it's the wrap around the school day, the addition of breakfast clubs, extending the school day, trying to provide some of that support for working families without additional cost to them is important. And there's many other supports that we have in place not available anywhere else that again are designed to try and support household budgets. I would also point out something I should have maybe said earlier, that council tax rates in Scotland are still significantly lower than elsewhere in these islands. So if you look at our average Band D property, for example, it is significantly lower council tax than elsewhere, and of course water bills are lower than elsewhere as well. I think I would also say, maybe just a point on the survey, that survey of course was pre-budget as I understand it. So it was forecast before the actual uplift was known. Now, it's now for councils now to consider their position in the light of what they now know. I do recognise that, some councils will be in a more challenging position than others, particularly if they're smaller. And that comes back to the point I was making earlier on, that we've got to look at the shape of that across Scotland and where there's opportunities, whether it's single island authorities that we're looking at in terms of the islands, but also that shared service landscape where councils can come together and share services and reduce the cost base.
Thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks very much. And we're now going to move online, and Mark Griffin has some questions.
Thanks, Convener. Staying with council tax, the government have proposed new bans for properties worth over £1 million, and I think the government have said that a targeted revaluation is estimated to cost around £10 million. I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can set out what that targeted revaluation will look like. How will that work in practice?
So the targeted revaluation is just at that higher end to create the two new high value property bans, and that doesn't that's not as a replacement to the consultation that's looking at wider reform and transformation in of the way local taxation is going to be taken forward. I'm really keen to still try and build a political consensus around that. So that still stands. But this, I guess, building on the the mansion tax proposals down south, given the different property base in Scotland, we have taken the view that it would be houses over a valuation of £1 million. And I think it would also mean that it's fairer, because actually we know that the difference in council tax liability is not fair the further you go up the bands proportionate to your income. So creating those two new high value property bands will I think help to make that fairer while that wider consultation is ongoing. It won't be until 2028. So there's time for discussion with COSL and local government about how the way it will work in practice. Because they may wish to consider distributional impacts, because clearly some local authorities will be bigger beneficiaries of that than others. So it is up to local government whether or not they have a different distribution formula to take account of that. But there's plenty of time to discuss that and to work that out. And the revenue estimates from all of that will be published once the policy is finalised, but the aim will be a fairer contribution from the highest value properties. And, of course, local government will get to keep the money, unlike the position down south.
Thanks. And Mark, before you go to the next question. Sorry to interrupt. Megan has indicated she wanted to come in on this one specifically. No? Oh, you've got your answer?
Yes.
Okay, super. Come on in, Mark, with your next questions.
Yeah, it was just to come back there. So, I completely understand the policy intent and the policy argument behind it. And I was more asking about the mechanics of how the revaluation exercise, the targeted revaluation exercise, would be carried out. But I understand that that's perhaps too early.
Ellen, it'll be helpful, Mark, just to say a little bit more detail if that's helpful. Yeah.
Very happy to, Cabinet Secretary. The Scottish assessors will take forward the revaluation exercise. They will look at available data through Registers of Scotland. They'll also have access to information through council notices and building warrants and improvements they might have made that, in their professional judgment, may have had an impact. And they will undertake. There'll be a process of notices, and then there'll be a process of valuation to identify those properties. So it will be undertaken by expert Scottish assessors independently of Scottish Government and local government to identify those properties. And they are confident in the assessment they have made of the costs of undertaking that exercise over the 2-year period, and then the appeals process that they provided to us, and that can be delivered effectively within that timescale. But they will be undertaking all of that detailed work over the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful information. And I wonder, since the government are now committed to the targeted revaluation, what consideration was given to, a wider full revaluation, given the length of time it's been since the last one was carried out?
Well, look, I understand that point, and of course we do have the consultation ongoing, which is important in terms of that wider point. I guess, and it's important to reassure on that because a lot of joint work has been done with COSLA. I guess, though, the fundamental point here is that you would want to link any future wider revaluation to wider reform of the council tax, and the consultation was, or is, which I think closes the end of this month, end of this week, was to try and build some political consensus around, well, what does that look like, not just among politicians, but try to take the public with us as well, because we know council tax can be, pretty contentious. It's got a contentious history, and we want to try and build some consensus around, well, what does the future look like for local taxation? So that is the attempt. It's clearly going to be a next Parliament issue, not a this Parliament issue, given the timeframes. But I'm hoping that that consultation and its findings will be able to be provided to the next Parliament as a way of a starting point to have some fresh discussions, hopefully on a cross-party basis, around, well, what is the art of the possible. There have been incremental reforms around second homes, empty homes, the mansion tax now and all of the rest of it. But I do think there's a more fundamental question. But I think that can only really happen by building enough consensus, and that will be for the next Parliament.
My last question, it's kind of been covered, but I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary, given the consultation ends this week, thinks that the government might be in a position to give even interim findings from that consultation before we break up.
Ellen, I think that would be tricky because it all has to be kind of digested. And anyway,
I think our assessment, having had the previous consultation in I'm going to get the year wrong, but I think it was 2023 or 24 on the multipliers proposal to change multipliers, was the volume of responses was such that the analysis took the full period of time that the contract had been awarded for. We also, in this process, have undertaken town hall events, which have been ongoing. So there's a lot of qualitative analysis to be undertaken. So our expectation with the contractors is that they have until late March, I think into early April, to produce interim findings and then a final report, which would take us beyond the pre-election restriction period in terms of then providing those, publishing those findings. So that's our expectation. But obviously we will work with contractors to see when that report will be available and act accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks very much. We're going to move on to a new theme, capital allocations. I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Investing in infrastructure and making sure that facilities within communities, whether they be buildings, bridges, roads, whatever local government have to manage, is vitally important. And the budget shows that there is a continued reduction in the capital allocation. and estimates suggest that council debt could be to the tune of about 25 billion across the local authorities. So how do we manage to ensure that facilities and infrastructure can be maintained and sustained when there is continual reductions within that process?
So, I mean, clearly the spending review outlook on capital is very difficult, full stop, because there's a real terms reduction over the spending review for capital. So we can't escape that fact in terms of, that then has a flow through to every part of the public sector. So it's on a downward trajectory. That's the first thing to say. With regards to local government, there are, again, some anomalies as well in terms of the capital position. So there has been one-off capital funding of 40 million for ScotWind, and then I think 20 million is for 26-27 is continuing. But again, it wasn't local government knew it wasn't guaranteed funding. Flooding funding, we're now profiling in a way that is more realistic to how it's going to be spent, because it was continuing being underspent. However, on top of that, we are trying to find imaginative ways of growing the envelope. So I have been keen to open the prospect of accelerator deals with individual local authorities. Now, that will depend on their borrowing capacity and their own debt levels, so not every local authority will be in the same position. However, the accelerator model deal that we had with Edinburgh has allowed Granton to become a major infrastructure expansion area, not just for housing, but for transport and all the rest of it. We're looking at with West Lothian for Winchborough station. We're looking at the island authorities for infrastructure investment in the Western Isles, Shetland and Orkney. And I'm keen to have further discussions with individual local authorities around whether we could have one or a cluster of local authorities around some of those infrastructure investments. So it's about trying to grow the pot because of the CDIL outlook being so restricted. And of course, we've used financial transactions mainly for the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, which again, local government gets its share of in terms of housing investment. So against a very challenging backdrop, we are trying to be imaginative in the ways that we're looking at expanding what we can deliver where.
And you make some very valid points about how you can support larger or bigger councils. And the smaller ones, as you've maybe identified, may have to share or become part of a group to manage to receive some of that, because without that, they then are very much outliers and don't have the same flexibility and don't have the same resource and may have more debt to manage for them to actually achieve that.
Look, I accept that. I mean, we have 32 local authorities that we were starting with a blank sheet of paper. You might not draw up the way they're... But I'm also conscious if you embark on a whole-scale local government boundaries review, it's going to tie us up for a decade, right? So, with the best will in the world. Whereas I think we could really accelerate the shared services space where, things happen more quickly by negotiation. So in the neck of the woods you were very familiar with around Stirling, Falkirk, Clackmannanshire, I know that discussions are being had around what might be the art of the possible around shared services. And I would really encourage that, because I just think it provides more flexibility, it provides those economies of scale, and reduces the cost base as well. So, we are trying to encourage and support that type of thinking.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks very much. We're going to move on to our next theme, which is non-domestic rates and the 2026 revaluation. I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and officials. The 2026 non-domestic rates revaluation is causing considerable concern across several sectors, particularly hospitality and retail businesses. I'm wondering what the Cabinet Secretary's initial response is, because even this morning MSPs have heard from the Scottish Hospitality Group, who have sent through a briefing paper outlining and detailing their concerns and the impact that non-domestic rates will have on their sector.
Well, so first of all, let me just reiterate firstly that I understand some of those concerns, but it is important to put on the record again that the average growth in rateable value is 12.23%. That's not to say there are not some ones that are much higher than that, but the average is 12.23%. And also that we have lowered the basic, intermediate and higher property rates, delivering the lowest basic property rates since 2018-19. But in recognising those concerns, we have done two things. So first of all, we're providing transitional release, a revaluation transitional relief. So very much absolutely recognising that point, to protect those seeing the most significant increases in rateable values, ensuring that the gross bills of an estimated 60,000 properties are lower in 2026-27 than they otherwise would have been. So that will smooth out those increases over the next few years, rather than it being a big bang and that potentially affecting the viability. So that's £184 million of investment in that alone. There's then in addition the relief to retail, hospitality and leisure premises, which is 15% for the basic or intermediate property rate, with a rateable value of up to and including 100,000. In mainland Scotland, we're obviously going further on the islands and some remote areas to 100%. And again, for the first time, retail and leisure will benefit from that, because if you remember, we did have a relief for hospitality only. Finally, what I've also said is that I'm aware, although it's a bit opaque, but you'll be aware of some of this press speculation about whether the UK government was going to move further on hospitality, given their revaluation and a different exercise down south. But nevertheless, they have intimated that there may be further support for hospitality. And I've written again, this is 2 letters now, to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury saying, look, we need to know whether that is going to happen. And if it's going to happen, are there going to be consequentials from that? And if there are, we're looking to give further support to hospitality through that process. So, taken together, I think we have a package of reliefs, as I said in my opening statement, estimated to be worth £864 million, which is, quite substantial. And again, I hope that there'll be a recognition that the transitional reliefs will go some way to smoothing out some of those who are facing additional costs.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'll certainly get on to rates relief in a second. However, I think the issue with the devaluation is that not all sectors are assessed in the same way, and this is why hospitality, unfortunately, has not been assessed in the same way, and that has, of course, resulted in them being penalised with extraordinary increases in rateable value. And again, some of the figures, are eye-watering, between 500 and 800% or more. So how does the Cabinet Secretary reflect on that? Because again, when you are going through revaluation, surely the consultation has to be done across the board with the full sector. However, we have a scenario here where you're saying, yes, this will even out in a few years' time. But some of these businesses don't have a few years' time for that to even itself out. So what is the Cabinet Secretary's direct response to hospitality, who, in my view, have not been fully considered when it comes to non-domestic rates?
So let me say, first of all, I've had a lot of engagement directly with hospitality, as have ministerial colleagues, because we absolutely want to hear what they've got to say. I would also just remind folk that, that this is an independent process, and it was, something that was agreed and welcomed by Parliament to move to the three-yearly revaluations, and for those to be independent, of course, of Scottish Government and local government, and that average 12.23% is important to remember. There is an issue about the methodology, and that's why the review of hospitality methodology, will give me the correct title, is underway, chaired by Mr Gill KC. So that work is ongoing at the moment to get to the heart of, I guess, a reasonable concern that hospitality have in relation to what's fair and what's not fair, particularly compared to other sectors. We've listened to that and accepted that, and the review is an attempt to do a more fundamental change. But, all of with that transitional relief, which, as I say, is £184 million, that is a big investment in supporting hospitality businesses and others to not have those big costs up front. And taken together, all of that, around 89,000 properties, which is 96% of all RHL properties, could benefit from zero or reduced rates. And the budget guarantees that support for 3 years of the revaluation. So it's not a one-off, it's for 3 years. And I would just finish on this point. We will continue to discuss the issue of hospitality. I am keen, if any further funding comes from the UK Government, to, in recognition of some of the issues with their revaluation, that I will absolutely commit to supporting hospitality further with that. And I'm pushing Treasury for an answer. There's clearly something being discussed. They're not being very forthcoming with the detail of what it is, but we will absolutely pursue them to find out if that is going to result in some further funding that can help the hospitality sector further as well.
That's helpful. I'm wondering if the Scottish Government has conducted any potential research or, again, further work with the hospitality sector, because, again, we know that roughly a further 20,000 hospitality jobs have gone since September 2025, with 9,000 since the last UK budget. Because of the re-evaluation, it seems to penalise success. So that's for hospitality businesses who have grown in terms of their business models, employed more people. It seems to be something that will work clearly against them, rather than something that they'll be able to cooperate with and move on from. So is there any analysis that you can touch upon that will be able to measure out potentially how many jobs might be impacted, how many businesses might be impacted because of this decision?
We have a regular, and I'm going to get the name of this wrong, I know, but we have a regular round table with the hospitality sector that myself, Ivan McKee and Richard Lockhead have regularly engaged with, and they have quite often come with material from the sector itself. We take that material and we do a bit of analysis on it. So, we very much welcome the flow of information, and we'll, I can absolutely give assurance that it will be looked at very carefully indeed and reflected upon. So, we'll continue to do that.
That's helpful. And on the rates relief that you mentioned, the 15% retail, hospitality and leisure sectors rates relief, the Scottish Retail Consortium has told this committee that that is an encouraging start, but of course it's less generous than at every level, as we see in England. So how does the Scottish Government respond? I appreciate that you said that you've written to UK Government counterparts regarding this issue, but as it stands, the offering here is less generous to other parts of the United Kingdom.
I might bring Ian in on this point in a second, but my understanding is part of the issue with the Stuchy, if you like, down south has been, of course, that the COVID supports have come to an end, which is where the 40% relief for RHL emanated from, and that actually where they had ended up with their permanent supports was an equivalent relief of, I think, between 10 and 12%. So actually, if you were to compare that equivalent, now it's not based on the same system, but if you were to regard it as an equivalent relief and translate it into that, it's about 10 to 12%. And actually, what we are doing with 15%, I think, compares reasonably well. And it's fair to say we have done a bit of an analysis about various sectors, north and south of the border, and again, what we've put in place compares quite favourably with some of that. I should also say that permanent change, though, in England, unlike here, has been subsidised by an increase of the very high property rates. So you're talking about the City of London, because they're able to garner a lot of additional revenue from that very high property rate. We don't have that property market here, so we couldn't have an equivalent, and that subsidises the reliefs that they have in England. Our reliefs are having to come out of the public purse. So this is money that is coming out of the public purse, not from the subsidy of very high property rates, because we don't have that property base here in Scotland to be able to do that. So it's very important putting that on the record. Ian?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll come in on a few of the points that you've raised, Ms Gallagher. I think the first thing to recognise is that all of the valuations are taken forward by independent assessors who use statutory guidance and case law to determine the valuations. So issues around hospitality valuation are absolutely nothing to do. There's no political element to that. It is chartered surveyors taking forward those valuations. And as Cabinet Secretary said, there is an independent review of whether those valuations in hospitality are accurate. But I think it's important to differentiate between the changes in England and changes in Scotland, because we have different revaluations. So from the Barclay review, one of the recommendations was that we should move to 3 yearly revaluations, and we should adopt a 1-year tone. So the tone is the date against which all values are benchmarked. In England, they have 3-year evaluations now, but they have a different tone. So the tone in England is 2 years ahead of time, which means it was slap bam in the middle of COVID, whereas our tone was slightly at the end of COVID. So the change from the 2023 revaluation to the 2026 revaluations in Scotland and England are very, very different. So when the Scottish Retail Consortium are comparing the offer in England, it's important to recognise that the average change in rateable value in Scotland for shops and retail is 6%. But the average change in England is 10%. So their values are higher in the first place. So by the time you apply a relief onto that value, you're starting from a different baseline. So it's not possible anymore to compare on a like-with-like basis on a universal basis. I think the other thing I would point to is, I think it was last week or the week before, we've published an assessment of all of the rateable value changes. It's on the Scottish Government website, and I'm sure we could write to the committee to make sure that they've got access to that. But that sets out all of the different rateable value changes by property type and by sector and things. So as I said, in Scotland, retail is 6% compared to 10% in England. For hotels in Scotland, it's 28% on average. In England, it's 78%. For public houses in Scotland, it's 15%. And for public houses in England, it's 30%. So you're immediately starting on a different position from which to apply the reliefs and the calculations and things. And as the Cabinet Secretary said, with the reduction in the poundage and the relief in England, it's an equivalent, depending on which tax threshold you're at, is an equivalent between a 10% and 12% relief, whereas in Scotland it's 15%, albeit not to the highest value properties. And as the Cabinet Secretary says, highest value properties in England will be subject to a supplement.
No, I understand that well. I think the issue is when it always comes to business, they will be looking to see where is it best for them to set up. Where is it best in terms of the best bang for their buck in order for them to actually be viable, sustainable and to grow as well. And again, with the non-domestic rates revaluation, I think what we're going to see here is, particularly in some parts of the sector itself, potentially it will be a bad news story instead of it being one of sustainability and that fluidity that you need within that sector itself. So that's the point that I'm making, and again that's taking it not from the numbers context, which is understandable, but in terms of what businesses see and how they're comparing what's happening between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Just very lastly, on the estimates of how much increase businesses will see on their NDR bills next year after re-evaluation and after new reliefs. I know I've touched upon this, Cabinet Secretary, but it's just in case you have any further comment on average, hospitality, retail and leisure businesses will have to pay. It'll be good to have a comparison between the three of them.
Right, okay, I'll maybe bring Ian in again. I mean, the average growth in retail value I had was 12.23, but that'll be across the board rather than differentiated. I'll see whether there is a differentiation in a second. And of course, you know, as I say, we've lowered the basic, intermediate and higher property rates in addition. But I don't know, do we have a differentiation, or is that something we could write to the committee?
Yeah, I didn't quite a differentiation of what. Sorry, I missed that.
So
bit.
within the percentage increase, is there a difference between retail, hospitality and leisure that make up that 12.23%?
Yes. So the report that we've published, which we'll write to the committee afterwards, has a breakdown by property type and by particularly the point you said earlier on about the average increases between 500 and 800%, I think are quite right. There's 258,000 properties on the valuation roll. There's 112 of those have got a rateable value increase of between 500 and 800. So I haven't done the maths on that, but it's a tiny fraction. For those, I accept that that might be an issue. But the median rateable value of those properties is 2,500. So actually, they're well below the small business bonus threshold. So for most of the people experiencing those excessive increases, it's because they're tiny rateable value properties in the first place, and they've just stayed within the SBBS threshold. But the report that we've got has breakdowns by rateable value type, by property type, as defined by assessors. So it breaks it down for public houses, hotels, and things like that. And they're all broken down very clearly, and the tables attached to that give you quite a lot of extra detail.
So I would suggest that we write with the report, but maybe just pull out some of that in the covering letter, just to draw attention to the kind of key points, so folk don't necessarily need to wade through the report. If that would be helpful. Okay.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Megan. Yeah, that certainly would be welcome. We're going to move on to a new theme: Verity House Agreement, Fiscal Framework, and Public Service Reform. And I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey for those questions.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good afternoon now, Cabinet Secretary and your colleagues. Just before I get to those issues, I wonder if I could firstly just ask you about the allocation to the affordable housing programme that's planned for 26-27. As I read the Blue Book, you have allocated £926 million towards this, which is a substantial increase on last year's figure of 768 million. It's a 17% increase. Could you just give us an indication of how that will get you towards your target, your 110,000 target by 2032 that you've outlined in various government statements?
Yeah, so you're right to point to what is a significant investment, and I guess it goes back to that point about choices, and that does mean, you know, that we're kind of putting our nailing our curlers firmly to the mast. I'm trying to think of all these special, that we're being explicit about where we're putting capital, but it does mean that other areas will perhaps not get quite so much. So the 926 million of capital funding will absolutely continue progress towards the Affordable Housing Supply Programme target of 110,000 affordable homes by 2032. That is part of the ambitious multi-year investment of £4.9 billion, of which £4.1 billion is public investment over the next 4 years. The 800 million will be from the private sector that will be levered in for things like mid-market rent, etc. And that will support the delivery of around 36,000 affordable homes, which is estimated to provide up to 24,000 children with a warm, safe home. So it is a big deal. It's a big investment. Now, you know, we need partners to deliver that. Local government, clearly a key partner, the RSLs as well. And, you know, we also want the private sector to play its part, particularly in areas like mid-market rent, build-to-rent, where there is clearly a demand and market for that. And you know, I guess I would also make the point that you know, construction inflation is still impacting on house building. So, it does mean that, we have to try and make sure that money goes as far as possible. And I think that is why the announcement that Mary McCallan made around the new housing body is an attempt to make sure we extract best value for money in terms of land availability, economies of scale, all of that. So I think, there is a lot happening in the housing space that we should be quite excited about.
Thank you for that. On another matter within the budget proposal, my colleagues in East Ayrshire have been pressing me for more information on the commitment that you announced to swimming lessons, and to see if there is a budget line in the Blue Book that identifies a figure towards that, if at all possible, or is it part of an overall commitment to sport that you also announced?
I think it's part of an overall commitment to sport. I'll bring in Ellen, but it is multi-year. So just to make sure, because I had to correct myself in terms of it's not a one-off, it is multi-year. And, it's an important intervention in terms of safety and so on and so forth. But it's part of the wider sport offer, Ellen?
Yeah, it's nested within the wider allocation for sport, alongside other things like extra time commitment through the SFA. There's a number of things that are nested together where there's been an envelope allocated with further discussion to then take place with delivery partners about the most effective way of having that flow through. So you would expect, as you would, for example, in the child poverty space, some of that funding ultimately to flow through to programmes of work that councils may take forward. But at the moment, it's nested within a portfolio envelope in sport, in the case of the sport, summer sport initiative, and similarly with the child poverty package or funding that's available within the budget, that's an uplift within the tackling child poverty line. There's further discussion to take place with key partners about how that funding is then distributed to have best effect in terms of local projects.
But it will mean additional funding for local government that currently isn't in the local government settlement. It's that point about, when we have policy development and or whether it's in the child poverty space or the sports space, a lot of that funding will find its way to local government once agreements are made around delivery and what's going to be delivered. So I guess it just is a good example of why the local government funding can be kind of more complex. So.
Ultimately, will the amounts that a local authority might wish to spend on the swimming commitment, will that be down to them, or are you going to ask for it to be earmarked, or dare I say ring-fenced?
I think we would want to get to a sensible arrangement without too much kind of red tape around it, and we want to try and keep it as straightforward as possible. A lot of it will be through school provision, so but the outcome is the important thing, and that is making sure that kids learn to swim.
On the wider issue about the part that the Verity House agreement has played, between the government and the local councils, can you say that the local councils can see their asks within the budget? I mean, have we seen the end of the bun fight, the ring fencing bun fight forever in this Parliament before we both leave?
That optimistic. Well, look, the figures kind of speak for themselves around baselining. So I think there's about 2.2 billion over the last three budgets as baseline. That's a lot of money that used to be ring fenced that is now baseline. So there's a direction of travel there for sure. But sometimes there are good reasons for it sitting within portfolio before allocation, because policy might change. So, for example, in the active travel space, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport wanted to change the way that funding was delivered. If that money had been baseline, she wouldn't have been able to do that, because the money would. Yeah, that was it. So there are checks and balances there around, what. Ultimately, it is about that balance. In terms of Verity House, I mean, one of the principles around budget, it was about open book and being open about the challenge. I've had numerous discussions with COSLA in the run-up to the budget. I would hope one thing they couldn't criticise would be about the process and the openness and discussions. So I was really clear with them on the 750 million asked for social care, that quantum just did not exist. It was more than the entire resource consequentials for the whole spending review. I couldn't, I can't produce something that is just of a quantum that is off the park. So I had to be frank about that. So then we were into territory. Well, what are the key asks? So the key asks was like further removal of ring fencing and increased baselining. We've done more of that. Freedom over council tax. We've done that. Additional funding. We've done that through the General Revenue Grant of 253. And what were those were the key ones. And I feel that we've done that, and that has been a very open conversation. Ultimately, the judgment and the response from COSLA is the response from COSLA, and we've provided, I think, a fair settlement in the context of the finances available to us.
Overall, would you say we're in a better place than we were at the start of this parliamentary session when the budget comes forward? Because my recollection of it is the huge one fight about ring fencing and arguments about allocations. Are we in a better spot? Because our colleague from COSLA just before you joined the committee, he was saying that he thinks the Verity House has delivered a number of improvements. It's not perfect, we know that, but it's better than where we were at the start of this process, where we just argued constantly about allocations and ring fencing.
I would agree with that, and I think we have taken a lot on board around the need for the trade-offs between quantum and flexibility. So, I'm very much in favour of giving local government maximum flexibility. But if I had my colleagues around the table, they would say, well, OK, but we've got to make sure that social care is delivering so that delayed discharges can come down. Or I would have education colleagues saying, well, we need to make sure that teacher numbers are maintained. So, there are checks and balances, but I do think we are in a better place. I don't know whether it will ever be perfect, but I do think we have made significant progress. And the fact I didn't hear the session before, so I'm pleased to hear that there are some recognition of that. And there's lots of other things that are maybe maybe not the kind of high, the kind of headline grabbing stuff, but things like the work going on in the single island authorities, the work going on around accelerator deals with the islands, stuff that, the work with the ferries task forces that are going on again around, the islands. There's lots of innovation happening that is a joint endeavour in local government and Scottish government. So I think there's an awful lot that sometimes doesn't make the headlines, but it's actually really, really important.
Thanks very much for that. On the fiscal framework and the role that it plays in all of this, it was published in last October. It didn't have any details, we think, of rules-based funding frameworks or information on accountability and assurance and things like that. Is that yet to be developed in the relationship between?
I think, again, there's some progress and the recognition from local government that, we've got to remove some of the ring fencing, and flexibilities are important, but on their side of delivery there needs to be transparency and accountability for 32 versions of delivery, and some, as is ever the case with anything, you'll have some performing better in some areas than in others. The Accounts Commission regularly give reports to where they think there needs to be improvement, and the thing that comes up more often than not, and I've seen Accounts Commission talking about this, is around transformation and change, and that the pace needs to be upped across, not just in local government, across the board. But, you know, we've got more control over that pace than other parts of the public sector. We rely on local government partners to get on with it, if you like. And we can oil the wheels of things like Invest to Save, but ultimately they've got to want to get into the discussions about shared services around doing things differently. And as autonomous bodies, they've got, you know, we can't force them to do that. They've got to want to do that. And I think, again, you're not going to see everybody moving on the same pace with that. You've got the Ayrshires that are obviously more further along the road, but we do need to see that happening in other places, and also good practice. Like if I take the work that Glasgow have done in particular around their changes to social work services that have led to a massive reduction of children coming into care. 32 local authorities should be doing that. If it works and it's like, you know, absolutely so obviously delivering better results, then you'd have to have a pretty good reason why you wouldn't want to go down that road and adopt those practices.
I've seen some huge improvements in the 3 years that you mentioned a few times, Cabinet Secretary, over the years. And it's great to see that collaborative working and shared service thing actually happening. But you mentioned Invest to Save there as well, and this committee was really keen that we extend that. But there was a wee concern about a kind of bidding element in that. Some councils were able to bid, perhaps to the detriment of others. How would we resolve that kind of issue, do you think?
Well, I think we've tried to learn from last year around, you know, what worked. And I mean, I think it has to be on the kind of power of the proposition. So there's no point in just scattering 30 million across, you know, like go and let 1,000 flowers bloom. It's got to be, you know, those that are showing a proposition that could actually help to show how it could be done. So we have had discussions and encouragement to local authorities that we think could benefit. So, for example, you know, the kind of the Falkirk, Clacks, Stirling scenario, we've been in discussions with them for quite some time around encouraging them to think about that, because you've got, you know, one of those local authorities, one of the smallest in Scotland, is, you know, has a fragility about it because of its size and capacity. And, you know, some really good people within that local authority, for sure. But it's just the scale. So there has to be that collaboration with neighbours, and they're up for it, but it needs the others to be as willing dance partners to get on with it. So, you know, I do think there's a lot of scope, and we want to. The Invest to Save is only really to oil the wheels. It's got to then, the momentum's then got to be with the local authorities themselves.
Okay. Thank you so much for the answers to those questions. Thanks very much, Convener.
Thanks very much, Willie. We're concluded. I've got one very brief question to ask you. So this is around the Nature Restoration Fund, the dedicated pot to local authorities, which has been cut. I had a conversation with a climate scientist yesterday who said to me that in any weighting, we need to be putting nature and biodiversity at the top of the tree in terms of the emergencies. And so I'm just a bit concerned. I've had councillors in rural areas getting in touch with me and saying they're very worried because that's a dedicated pot. They access that fund in a different way than the larger nature restoration fund. So it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Because we have, obviously, through the investments in the national bodies, public bodies, with, you know, there are increases in these areas, particularly in forestry and peatland restoration, etc. I think, Convener, maybe the best thing is if I take that away and just have a look at it specifically, if you're happy for me to do that.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, well, that concludes our discussion. Thanks very much for coming to talk to us about the budget. It's been a very useful discussion. And that concludes the public part of our meeting, so we'll move into private. Thanks.